The night Adrian Voss came home to an empty bedroom, he stood in the doorway for a full minute without moving. Not because he was surprised. Because some part of him had known this was coming, had felt it building for months like pressure behind a dam, and he'd chosen every single time to ignore it. The bed was made. Not the way the housekeeper made it, with those stiff decorative pillows Elena used to complain about. Made the way Elena made it when she wasn't planning on sleeping in it again. Smooth, final, like a statement. His eyes moved to the closet. The door was open. Half her clothes were gone, not thrown around the room, not dragged out in anger. Gone neatly, deliberately, the way a woman removes herself from a life she's already grieved. On the floor, one suitcase, packed, zipped, sitting there like an accusation that didn't need words. And tucked against the side of it, a manila envelope. No name on the front, no note clipped to the outside. Just the envelope, sitting there like it had been waiting for him, specifically for the version of him that would finally, too late, come looking. Adrian Voss had faced down federal agents, rival organizations, men who wanted him dead with professional commitment. He had never once flinched. He flinched now. Before we go any further, if you've ever loved someone and let silence become the answer to every question they stopped asking, this story is going to hit somewhere real. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we release stories like this every week, and you will not want to miss what's coming. Drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it reaches you, hit that like button so we know. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because the suitcase is only the end of something that started long before Elena stopped waiting. Adrian Marcus Voss was not a man who had been handed anything. He had built everything: the properties, the influence, the network of arrangements that kept half the city's money moving. And indirections nobody discussed at dinner parties from scratch, from hunger. From a particular kind of rage that gets into a young man's bones when he watches his father disappear into debt and never come back out. He was 41. He looked older in the eyes and younger in the way he moved, still quick, still sharp, with the kind of physical presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around him without anyone quite understanding why. He wasn't the tallest man in any room. He wasn't the loudest. He was just the one everyone watched to know how the temperature was going to change. He had met Elena Marcelli at a dinner he'd attended as a favor to someone who owed him one. She was 34 then. A structural engineer, which he found both practical and quietly impressive. She had a way of looking at problems, buildings, people, rooms full of tension, like she was calculating where the load-bearing walls were. She looked at him that first night like she was figuring out what was holding him up and what was going to give way first. He asked her to dinner 3 days later. She said, "I know who you are. I need you to know that I know, and I'm saying yes anyway, which means I'm either very perceptive or very stupid. And I haven't figured out which yet." He laughed, genuinely. Not the performance of laughing that he'd refined over years of business dinners and negotiations. Actually laughed in a way that surprised both of them. They were married 14 months later in a ceremony that Elena insisted be small, which Adrian agreed to, and then slightly violated by not being able to cut the guest list below 80 people because of obligations he couldn't fully explain to her family. She had looked at him at the altar with that same calculating expression, studying the load-bearing walls, and then smiled, like she'd decided the structure was sound enough. 2 years it was, not perfect. Elena knew what Adrian was broadly. She didn't know details and didn't ask for them, which was a kind of agreement they had without ever making it explicit. He came home. He was present when he was there. He made her laugh at least twice a week, which she once told him was her personal minimum requirement for a relationship, and he took it seriously enough to never slip below it. Then the Marchetti problem started. The Marchetti situation was, in Adrian's mind, a temporary operational crisis. The kind of thing that required intense focus for a defined period, and then resolved. He had handled 20 things like it before. What he failed to account for was that Elena told him she was pregnant on the same Tuesday, that Marcus Coletti, his second-in-command, a man he'd known for 19 years, walked into his office and told him that someone in their inner circle was skimming money from 3 of their property fronts and feeding information to the Marchetti organization on the east side. Adrian heard both pieces of news on the same day. He went home that night, held Elena's hands across the kitchen table, Told her the pregnancy was the best thing he'd heard in years, and he meant it, genuinely, in that moment. And then at 2 in the morning, he was back on the phone with Marcus trying to figure out who had access to the accounts that were bleeding. He told himself he'd get back to the pregnancy, to Elena, to all of it. He was going to be present for this. He just needed to handle the immediate problem first. The immediate problem lasted 7 months. In the first month, Elena stopped mentioning the prenatal appointments when he missed them, because he'd started getting a particular look when she brought them up, not annoyed exactly. More like a man being asked to pay attention to a second conversation while he's trying to save his life in the first one. She hated that look. She stopped volunteering reasons to see it. She rearranged the spare bedroom herself because the contractor Adrian had said he'd call never got called. She painted it herself over a weekend, a soft gray green that the internet told her was calming for infants, standing on a step stool at 5 months pregnant with a brush in one hand and her phone in the other, waiting for him to come home. He didn't come home that weekend. He called Sunday evening, voice tight and distracted, and said there was a situation with the Portland arrangement that needed to be handled in person, and he'd be back by Wednesday. He was back Thursday. He did not see the painted room until Elena pointed at it 3 days later, and even then he said, "Looks great," while reading something on his phone. She watched him say it. She watched his eyes never leave the screen. She went into the kitchen and stood at the sink for a while, not doing anything, just standing. In the second month, she started keeping a list. Not a vindictive list, not evidence for a lawyer. Just a private record in the Notes app on her phone, because she was an engineer and engineers document things when they're trying to understand structural failure. The list was not dramatic, it was quiet and specific. March 12 dinner alone again. 4th time this week. March 17 asked him if he wanted to feel the baby move. He said tomorrow. Tomorrow came. He left at 6 a.m. March 24. He forgot the ultrasound. Said he'd had it wrong in his calendar. Didn't ask to see the pictures. By the 3rd month, she had stopped expecting things. Not in a dramatic, grieving way, in a quiet, protective way. The way you learn not to put your hand near a stove burner, even when the light isn't on. She had learned the temperature of this marriage, and she had adjusted accordingly. She ate dinner at 7, whether he was home or not. She went to bed when she was tired. She stopped leaving the light on in the front hall when she knew it would still be on at 3 in the morning when she woke up for the 3rd time to use the bathroom. The house became hers in a way it hadn't been before, not warm exactly, but organized around her rhythms, her schedule, her needs. She had a favorite chair by the window in the study where she'd read or work or just sit watching the street below. She had a particular mug she used every morning, and a route she walked each afternoon, same sidewalk, because the doctor said to keep moving, and she'd found that the rhythm of it steadied something in her chest that otherwise felt loose and unstable. She was 6 months pregnant and managing an entire life entirely by herself. She had stopped telling her sister how things were going. Her sister Carmen had asked once carefully, in the way family asks when they already know and just want permission to know officially. Asana had said we're adjusting and changed the subject, and Carmen had let her, and that was the shape of it. What Elena had not told anyone, not Carmen, not the 2 friends she still talked to regularly. The therapist she had started seeing at month 4 and stopped mentioning to Adrian by month 5 because he kept saying good in a way that meant he didn't have bandwidth to think about what she was. Actually saying was that she had found something. 6 weeks before she packed that suitcase, Elena had been looking for the second copy of their property insurance documents because there was a discrepancy in the renewal paperwork, and Adrian wasn't answering his phone, and she needed the policy number. She went into his home office. She did not go in there often. Not because he'd ever told her not to, he hadn't, but because it felt like a space that wasn't hers, and she was a woman who respected boundaries she'd drawn herself. The insurance documents weren't where he kept the household files. She checked the drawer, then the filing cabinet, then the credenza along the far wall that he rarely used. Credenza was locked. This did not alarm her initially. Adrian locked things. It was habit professional, not personal. But the key was in the lock, like someone had been in a hurry and forgotten to take it out. She stood there for a moment, engineering brain ticking over. Structural problem. She was looking for insurance documents. The filing cabinet was a credenza. It was unlocked. She opened it. The insurance documents were not inside. What was inside was a folder that had no label on the tab. Inside the folder were copies of financial records. She didn't recognize account transfers, wire confirmations, routing numbers going to an entity called Kessler Holdings that she had never heard Adrian mention. There were printed emails, the kind that somebody prints because they don't want them on a device. And there were photographs. The photographs were the part that made her sit down on the floor of his office with her back against the credenza and her hands very still in her lap. They were surveillance photographs, the candid kind, taken without subject's awareness. And the subjects were Adrian at what looked like a restaurant, a parking structure, the back entrance of one of his properties, talking to a man Elena recognized from the news 18 months ago as a federal investigator who'd been publicly named in connection with an organized crime case that had eventually gone nowhere. She sat on that floor for a long time. What she was looking at had more than one possible explanation. She understood that. She was not a person who leapt to conclusions. She was a person who gathered load data before she made a structural assessment. But the explanations she could think of were, in different ways, all dangerous. Either Adrian was working with federal investigators, in which case the people around him would consider him a traitor. Or someone was building a record to make it look like he was, in which case Adrian was being set up from inside his own organization. Or something else entirely was happening, something she didn't have enough information to map yet. Any version of it was dangerous. Any version of it was a reason to be afraid. She put everything back exactly as she'd found it. Locked the credenza, took the key out of the lock and put it in the small ceramic dish on the windowsill where Adrian kept miscellaneous keys, so it would look like it had always been there. She went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and thought very carefully about what to do next. That night, Adrian came home at 11, ate the food she'd left in the oven, and went directly to his office. He came to bed at 1:30. He fell asleep in 4 minutes, which he had always been able to do, and which she had always slightly envied and now found slightly enraging. She lay in the dark beside him and listened to him breathe and understood that she was alone in this marriage in a way she hadn't fully articulated before, and that the aloneness had just become something different, more concrete, more dangerous. She started making a different kind of plan. Elena was not a woman who acted without thinking. This was both her strength and the thing that had kept her in that house for months longer than she should have stayed, because thinking takes time, and she was thorough. She spent 2 weeks doing research she didn't tell anyone about. She called Carmen and asked her carefully about an old friend of Carmen's who had worked for a period as a paralegal and now ran some kind of victim support nonprofit. Carmen gave her the number without asking why. She made a call, had a conversation that was general and hypothetical, and gave her a set of answers she filed away. She made a second call to a woman named Dr. Patricia Osi, a friend from graduate school who now consulted on financial forensics for a law firm, framed as curiosity about an engineering project involving offshore financial structures. Dr. Osi was smart and didn't entirely buy the framing, but answered the questions anyway and then said, carefully, "Are you okay, Elena?" And Elena said, "Yes, I'm just researching something," and Dr. Osi said, "Call me if that changes," with a particular emphasis that meant she knew and Elena knew she knew. She spent several evenings while Adrian was in his office, or simply not home, carefully photographing the documents she'd found in the credenza, using her phone, covering the flash with her finger so no light would show under the door. She organized what she had into a digital folder with a password she'd used for nothing else. She did not know exactly what she was going to do with it. She only knew that she needed to have it. That whatever was coming, federal investigation, internal betrayal, something she hadn't predicted yet, she needed to not be the woman who had no information and no plan. She was 36 years old and pregnant, and her husband had been functionally absent for 7 months, and she had stumbled onto something that could get people hurt, herself possibly included. She was afraid, but she was also, and this was the part she hadn't expected clarifying, like the fear had burned off a fog she'd been living in. Like she could seize the load-bearing walls of her life clearly for the first time in a year, and she could see which ones were cracked. 3 weeks before she packed the suitcase, she had a conversation with Adrian. Not a fight, not an ultimatum. A conversation at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, one of the rare hours he was actually present and not visibly preoccupied with something else. She said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually hear it. He put his phone down. That was something, at least. She said, do you know what's happening with our organization that could put this family in danger? The pause before he answered was a half-second too long. She counted it. He said, I'm handling some things. Nothing that's going to come near you, she said. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read: guilt, possibly, or the organizational version of it, the calculation of how much to say. He said, Elena, I've got it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, okay, just that, okay. She went back to the kitchen. He picked up his phone. She stood at the counter and understood, with a kind of cold precision, that he had just chosen not to tell her the truth. Not because he didn't trust her, because he didn't think she was owed it. She was the wife. She was managed, not included. She was going to be a mother in 6 weeks. She was not going to raise a child in a house where she was managed, not included. She packed the suitcase on a Thursday, while Adrian was at a meeting she wasn't told about. She packed slowly and deliberately, which surprised her. She'd expected something frantic, emotional, the way you see in movies. But it wasn't like that. It was more like the final stage of a calculation she'd been running for months. This item, not that one. These documents, this medication, these photographs she didn't want to leave behind. She packed the photograph of their wedding, then stood holding it for 30 seconds, then put it back on the dresser. She photographed the inside of the credenza one last time. She'd checked it again 3 days earlier, and the documents were still there, unchanged, and added it to the file. She wrote a letter. It took 4 drafts. She wasn't a writer, she was an engineer. But she knew what she needed to say, and she said it without ornamentation. And when she was done with the 4th draft, she read it through once, changed 2 words, and folded it into the manila envelope, with a copy of the financial photographs and one other document, the ultrasound image from the week before, the one where you could already see the shape of the baby's face if you looked at the right angle. She put the envelope against the side of the suitcase. She called a car to a cross street 3 blocks away. She walked out of the house, without looking back at the bedroom, down the service staircase, through from the side entrance that led out onto the garden path. She had chosen the service staircase, deliberately fewer cameras, and the one that covered it had been on a maintenance cycle for the past 10 days. She knew the camera schedule because she had spent 3 weeks paying attention to things Adrian assumed she didn't pay attention to. The car was waiting. She didn't cry until she was 6 blocks away, and even then it was brief, a specific, targeted grief, the kind you allow yourself when you've been holding it for too long. She let herself have 90 seconds of it. Then she looked out the window and focused on what came next. Adrian came home at 10:47. He knew the time because he checked his watch out of habit when he pulled through the gate muscle memory from years of needing to account for his own whereabouts. The house was quiet in the specific way it was quiet when Elena had already gone to bed, which she'd been doing earlier, as the pregnancy progressed, and he registered it, the way he registered a lot of things about her lately, peripherally, with the intention to pay more attention when the current crisis passed. He went to the kitchen first. There was nothing on the counter, which meant she hadn't left anything for him. He opened the fridge, made himself a plate of whatever was in there, stood at the counter and ate it in 6 minutes. He went upstairs. He reached for the light switch in the bedroom doorway and turned it on. And he stood there. The room was wrong, not dramatically, not destroyed, just empty in a way it hadn't been before, and it took him a full 4 seconds to process what his eyes were telling him. Closet. He crossed the room in 3 steps and opened the closet door wide and stood looking at her side of it. The dresses were there, not all of them. The row of shoes thinned. The shelf above where she kept the smaller things, the scarves, the jewelry she wore regularly. Gaps. He turned and saw the suitcase. He saw the envelope. He stood very still with both hands at his sides. The first thing he felt was not what he expected. He expected anger. He was a man conditioned by 20 years of professional threat to respond to threat with controlled aggression. What he felt instead was something in his chest that he did not have good language for. Kind of structural failure, fittingly enough. Like something load-bearing had given way without warning. Picked up the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He sat down on the floor of the bedroom, not on the bed, not in a chair. On the floor, with his back against the footboard, and he held the envelope in both hands. He sat there for a while. Outside, the city moved through the night the way it always did. Cars. The distant sound of something that might have been a siren. Normal sounds that had nothing to do with the fact that his wife had walked out of this house carrying their unborn child, and he did not know where she was. He opened the envelope. The financial photographs came first. He looked at them and his jaw tightened, not because the photographs themselves surprised him, but because their presence in Elena's hands meant she'd found the credenza documents, which meant she'd been sitting on this information for weeks, which meant she had known and not said anything, and he had not noticed that she knew, which meant he had been paying so little attention to the actual woman living in his house that she had been quietly gathering evidence of a conspiracy against him, and he had been completely unaware. Turn to the second item, the ultrasound photograph. The baby's face visible at the right angle. He held it with both hands and did not move for a very long time. The letter came last. Elena's handwriting, she had an engineer's handwriting, precise and functional, no flourishes. She had written it with a fine point black pen, the kind she kept in the cup on her side of the desk. She did not open with accusation. She opened with a fact. I found the photograph 6 weeks ago. I didn't tell you because the conversation where I told you would have become a conversation about your problem, not about us. We would have spent another 3 months managing your crisis and not talking about what's happened to this marriage. And then I would have had this baby, and we would have spent 3 more months managing the baby's needs without talking about it. And I would have woken up in 5 years and realized I had been alone the entire time. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I love this child more than I love the life I've built around, waiting for you to come back. The photographs in this envelope are copies. I have the originals and everything else I found, including information I believe puts our family in danger from someone inside your organization. I'm telling you this not as a threat. I'm telling you this because even now, I'd rather you know than not know, which is probably something you should think about. I need you to understand something clearly. I did not leave because I am a woman who gives up. I left because I refused to teach our child that the people who are supposed to love you most get to treat you like a footnote. Find out who's doing this to you. Fix it. Or don't. But I'm done waiting to find out which one you'll choose. He read it twice. Then he sat in the bedroom of the house they had lived in together for 3 years, on the floor against the footboard of a bed she would not be sleeping in tonight, and he held her letter in his hands, and he understood with the specific, bone-level clarity of a man who has spent his entire adult life making calculations and has just encountered a loss. No calculation prepared him for exactly what he had done. He had been so afraid of losing his empire that he had not noticed he was losing her. And she had not made a scene. She had not screamed or accused or threatened. Simply, carefully, thoroughly left. The most feared man in this city sat alone in his bedroom at 11:30 at night, holding an ultrasound photograph, and he was afraid in a way he had never been afraid before, not of what was coming for him, but of what he had already done and could not take back. He got up off the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, his city, or what he'd always told himself was his city, and for the first time in 20 years, it looked simply like a collection of buildings. Just buildings. Indifferent. He looked at the photograph in his hand, the shape of his child's face. He said quietly, to no one in the room.
Okay.
Just that. He went to find his phone. There were 17 messages he hadn't read. 2 were from Marcus. 5 were from a number he didn't recognize. 1 was from a man named Vincent Caruso, who was technically the head of his legal operations, and practically the person who knew where all the money went, and who had never once called Adrian directly in 4 years of working together. Adrian stared at Vincent's message for a moment. Then he put the phone down. He picked up the ultrasound photograph again. He was going to find her. That was the first thing. Everything else, the messages, the credenza photographs, the betrayal that was clearly sitting somewhere in the middle of his organization, everything else was second. For the first time in 7 months, something had moved to the top of his priorities that didn't have anything to do with the organization. He just had to figure out how to find a woman who was very smart and had clearly planned her disappearance with engineering-level precision. He almost smiled at that. Almost. He pulled up a contact he rarely used, a woman named Sasha Park, who did the kind of finding people work that wasn't listed on any business card, and sent a single message. I need to find someone, my wife. Tonight if possible. The reply came back in under 2 minutes. Send me what you have. Outside, the city went on being indifferent. Inside, Adrian Voss stood in his bedroom with an empty suitcase on the floor and a letter in his hand and a photograph of his unborn child's face, and he started, quietly and with absolute focus, taking apart everything he thought he'd known about the past 7 months. Sasha Park called back at 12:41 in the morning. Adrian was still standing at the window when the phone rang. He hadn't moved much in the intervening hour, had made coffee he didn't drink, had stood in the doorway of the nursery. Elena had painted herself and looked at the gray-green walls for a while without going in, had read her letter a third time, and then folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, close. Talk to me, he said. Sasha's voice was flat and professional in the way of someone who had been woken up for worse things than this. Credit cards dark, phones dark. She didn't use either after 7:18 this evening, which is when she bought a bottle of water and a magazine at a pharmacy 4 blocks from your house. She's not using her accounts. She planned this. She's not using anything traceable, a pause. She's smart. I know she's smart. Then you know I can't find her in the next 6 hours unless she makes a mistake, and she doesn't sound like a woman who makes mistakes. Adrian looked out at the city. What can you get me? Cell tower data takes time. Security footage from the pharmacy I can have by morning. Car services, she didn't use her usual app. I already checked. If she used cash for a car, that's harder. She used cash. Yeah. Another pause. You want me to keep going? Keep going. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen with the untouched coffee and thought about the last time he had actually looked at his wife. Not glanced at her while thinking about something else. Actually looked at her. The way you look at a person when you understand they are a specific and irreplaceable individual, and not simply a constant that you're accounting for. He couldn't find the memory cleanly. That was the part that landed heaviest. Picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus Coletti answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either, which meant something else was in motion that Adrian didn't know about yet. She's gone, Adrian said. A silence on the other end. Then how long? Tonight I got home at 10:47. Do you know where? No, Sasha's working it. He paused. I also found something in the house. We need to talk in person. Another silence, different quality, tighter. Tonight, Marcus said. Tomorrow morning. Early and Marcus, he kept his voice level. Come alone. He ended the call before Marcus could respond. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Elena had sat across from him 3 weeks ago, and asked him a question he hadn't answered honestly, and he opened his laptop and began pulling up the financial records for Kessler Holdings. It took him 40 minutes to confirm what he already suspected. Kessler Holdings had received 11 transfers in the past 9 months, totaling just under $4 million, routed through 3 of his property management fronts. The transfers were structured to stay below reporting thresholds. They were timed to coincide with periods when his attention was on other problems, the Marchetti situation, the Portland renegotiation, a licensing issue with one of the legitimate restaurant operations that had kept his legal team occupied for 6 weeks. They were too well timed to be coincidence. Someone had been watching his calendar. Someone who had access to his operational schedule. He counted the people who had that access. It was a short list. Marcus was on it. So was Vincent Caruso. So was a man named Danny Roth, who handled his property accounts and had worked for Adrian for 11 years, and whose daughter Adrian's had sent to college because Danny's wife had gotten sick, and the family had run through their savings in 18 months. He sat with the list for a long time. The betrayal part didn't surprise him. He'd been in this life long enough to know that loyalty had a market value, and that market value shifted. What surprised him was the photographs in the credenza, the surveillance shots of him with the federal investigator. Because Adrian had not met with that man voluntarily. He had been approached. Twice, in fact, once outside a restaurant 18 months ago, and once in the parking structure where the photograph had been taken. Both times he had declined, briefly and without ambiguity, and walked away. Both times he had not reported the approach to anyone in his organization, because he considered it managed and beneath the threshold of concern. Someone had photographed those meetings. Someone had kept the photographs. Someone had put them in Adrian's own home credenza, in a locked drawer, with enough other documentation to make Adrian look like a federal informant to anyone who examined the contents without context. This was not a skimming operation. This was a termination plan. Marcus arrived at 7:15 the next morning. He looked like a man who had also not slept, same quality of tightness around the eyes, same stillness that wasn't relaxation but the performance of it. He was 53 years old, heavy through the shoulders, with gray at the temples that he'd stopped fighting several years ago. He had known Adrian for 19 years, had stood next to him at 2 funerals and 1 federal inquiry, had been the first person Adrian had called when the Marchetti situation broke. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Adrian sitting at the table with a manila folder in front of him. "Coffee?" Adrian said. "Sure." Adrian didn't get up. He gestured at the machine on the counter. Marcus poured himself a cup and stood by the counter and did not sit down. "Took the baby and left," Adrian said. "You said." Marcus drank his coffee. "How are you? I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to not do the thing you do where you take a second to calibrate your answer before you give it to me." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Okay. Did you know about the Kessler transfers?" The pause was exactly the wrong length. "What transfers?" Marcus said. Adrian opened the folder and turned it around and slid it across the table. Marcus looked at it. His jaw moved once. He set his coffee cup down on the counter with a careful, controlled motion that Adrian recognized as the physical discipline of a man managing a reaction he didn't want visible. "Where did you get this?" Marcus said. "Elena found it." "In my credenza. In your—" Marcus stopped. "Someone put that in your house." "I know someone put it in my house. What I'm asking you is whether you know who and whether you knew about the transfers." "Adrian." Marcus's voice had shifted, not defensive exactly, but careful, the way a man gets careful when he's navigating something in real time. "I need you to hear me. I found inconsistencies in the property account 6 weeks ago. I was running it down quietly because I didn't want to bring you something half-cooked when you were already dealing with the Marchetti situation, and I didn't." 6 weeks. I know how that sounds. You knew something was wrong with the account 6 weeks ago, and you didn't tell me. Adrian's voice was completely level. "My pregnant wife found this in my credenza documents that make me look like I've been cooperating with federal investigators, and you knew 6 weeks ago that something was moving in the accounts, and you said nothing." I was trying to confront Marcus. The name landed flat and final. "Stop talking for a second." Marcus stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. "Either you were protecting me by investigating privately," Adrian said, "or you knew exactly what was in those accounts, and you needed 6 weeks to make sure you'd positioned yourself correctly. And I have known you for 19 years, and I genuinely do not know which one it is right now. That's the problem." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "It's the first one. I need it to be the first one. It is. Then tell me what you found." "All of it. Right now." Marcus pulled out the chair across from Adrian and sat down heavily. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked like a man who was deciding in real time to do something he'd been avoiding. "The transfers started 9 months ago," he said. "Kessler Holdings is a shell. It's built through 3 layers. I traced it back to a holding company registered in Nevada, and then to a private equity entity that has almost no paper trail." "Almost." He paused. "The original capitalization for Kessler came from a wire that originated at a law firm in the city. The law firm is Caruso and Blanchard." Adrian did not move. "Vincent," he said. "The law firm's name is on the capitalization wire. That doesn't prove Vincent personally. Vincent controls every account that law firm touches. Has for 12 years. Adrian looked at Marcus steadily. "And the surveillance photographs. The ones of me with the federal investigator." Marcus went very still. "You know about those too," Adrian said. It wasn't a question, and the way Marcus didn't answer immediately was itself an answer. "I heard there were photographs," Marcus said. "I didn't know where they were. I didn't know someone had put them in your house." He looked up. "I swear to you on my kids, Adrian. I did not know they were here." "But you knew they existed," I heard. Marcus exhaled. 3 weeks ago. A rumor that someone had documented 2 meetings between you and a federal rep and was holding the material. I was trying to find out where it was. I thought it was being held as leverage, not planted. Why didn't you tell me?" The question sat on the table between them. "Because," Marcus said, "I didn't know yet whether I could trust the people I'd need to use to find it, and I didn't want to alarm you until I had something I could actually bring you. That's the second time in this conversation you've made a decision about what to protect me from." Adrian's voice was quiet and precise. I'm not someone you protect from information, Marcus. I'm the person you bring the information to. You know that. I know. Do you? Marcus put his face in his hands briefly, a gesture Adrian had seen from him exactly twice before, both times when something had gone irreparably wrong, and then he lifted his head. His eyes were tired and something else. Not guilty. Scared, maybe. There's something else, Marcus said. Adrian waited. The Marchetti situation. The thing that started 9 months ago that's been eating your attention. Marcus pressed his hands flat on the table again. I think it was manufactured. I think someone inside fed the Marchetti people enough information to make the conflict look real, kept it burning just hot enough to keep you occupied while the account transfers were running. The silence in the kitchen changed quality. You're telling me, Adrian said slowly, that I've been managed for 9 months by someone in this organization using the Marchetti conflict as a distraction, while they bled the accounts and built a federal informant frame around me. That's what I think happened, yes. Adrian stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room. Outside, the morning was doing its ordinary morning things. A delivery truck on the street, a woman walking a dog. None of it had any idea what was happening in this kitchen. He thought about Elena, about the Sunday she'd sat across this same table and asked him, do you know what's happening in this organization that could put this family in danger? And he'd said, I've got it. Said it to her face while she looked at him with that engineering precision of hers, calculating which walls were cracked. She had been trying to tell him what she'd found. He hadn't heard it. He'd been so deep inside a crisis someone else had built for him that he hadn't heard his own wife trying to reach him. Turned around. I need you to do something, he said to Marcus. And I need you to understand that if I find out later that any piece of what you just told me was positioned to protect yourself, we are done in a way that cannot be undone. Do you understand that? Marcus looked at him without flinching. I understand. Find out where Danny Roth is today. Don't tell him you're looking. And get me everything you have on Caruso's contacts over the past year, anyone outside the organization he's met with, more than twice. Okay? And Marcus. Adrian picked up the folder from the table. If Elena reaches out to anyone, her sister, her friend Patricia Osi, anyone I want to know. Not to stop her, not to bring her back. I just need to know she's safe. Marcus looked at him for a moment with an expression Adrian couldn't quite categorize. It might have been something like respect, or something like grief, or possibly just exhaustion wearing the mask of both. I'll make some calls, Marcus said. Vincent Caruso arrived at the office on Meridian Street at 9A. The way he always did, pressed shirt, leather portfolio, the particular brand of punctuality that announced itself as discipline, rather than servility. He was 61, thin in a precise way, with wire-rimmed glasses he'd worn since his 40s, and a manner that was so consistently pleasant that Adrian had once observed it was the most unsettling thing about him. Nobody was consistently pleasant. It was a performance, and performances had purposes. Adrian was already in the conference room when Vincent walked in. This was not the usual arrangement. Usually they met in Adrian's main office with its view of the South Side and its particular atmosphere of deliberate authority. The conference room was neutral space. Adrian had chosen it deliberately. Vincent paused for just a fraction of a second when he saw Adrian sitting there, without any papers in front of him, without anything on the table except 2 cups of coffee. Morning, Vincent said. Marcus said, you wanted to go over the licensing status on the Crescent Street property. Sit down, Vincent. Something moved across Vincent's face, brief and controlled. He sat. You look tired, Vincent said. Elena okay? When did you last speak to Elena? A pause. Couple of weeks ago? She called about the insurance renewal on the Halston property. Why? She left last night. Vincent's expression arranged itself into concern. It was a very good arrangement. Left as in packed a suitcase and walked out of the house with our unborn child. Adrian picked up his coffee cup and looked at it and put it back down. She also left me some interesting documents, financial records, photographs, the kind of thing that would look very bad for me if it ended up in front of a federal grand jury. The silence between them was perfectly calibrated. Vincent was smart enough to know that an immediate denial was the wrong move, and smart enough to know that Adrian knew that, which meant they were now in a particular kind of conversation that both of them recognized. I'm sorry to hear about Elena, Vincent said carefully. I bet. Adrian, if there are documents in circulation that could cause problems, I can work with our contacts at the firm to... The firm, Adrian said. Caruso and Blard. Of course, the firm has resources to... Caruso and Blanchard, which you've operated independently for 12 years. Which capitalized a shell entity called Kessler Holdings 9 months ago via a wire transfer that you personally authorized. Adrian kept his voice conversational. Tell me about Kessler Holdings, Vincent. The performance of pleasantness did not collapse. That was what made Vincent good at what he did. The performance had structural integrity. It didn't just crumble under pressure. But something in his eyes recalibrated. The pleasant expression stayed in place while the calculation behind it ran very fast. I don't know what you think you have, Vincent said, but I'd encourage you to be careful about making accusations without... I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you what I found. There's a difference. Adrian leaned forward slightly. An accusation is when I don't know yet. I know, Vincent. What I'm giving you is the opportunity to tell me why. The silence stretched. Vincent picked up his coffee. Set it down. You've been in this for 20 years, Vincent said. You're good at it. But you've also been doing it the same way for 20 years, and the landscape changed, and you didn't change with it. The federal interest in the city's operations has tripled in the past 3 years. The Marchetti side was always going to push for expansion. You've been managing it the old way, force of personality, isolation, old relationships, and it hasn't been enough. So you were renegotiating my organization's relationship with the Marchetti people while stealing from the accounts and framing me as a federal informant, Adrian said. For my own good, I was building an exit strategy. For you, Vincent's jaw tightened, for everyone. The operation couldn't survive another 5 years unchanged. I was positioning for transition, by destroying my credibility so that the transition wouldn't include me. The pleasant expression was gone now. What was underneath it was not malice exactly, it was something colder and more professional. A man who had made a business decision and stood by the math of it. You have a pregnant wife, Vincent said. You could take what you've built and go. There's enough money moved to offshore structures to give your family. Stop. Adrian's voice cut across the table like a blade. Stop talking about my wife and my family as variables in your transition plan. Stop right now. Vincent stopped. Adrian stood up. He was quiet for a moment, and the quality of his quiet was the specific kind that people in his world had learned over 20 years to pay close attention to. You built the Marchetti conflict to distract me, he said. You planted the surveillance photographs in my house to be found in case I survived the transition and needed to be neutralized. And you arranged it badly enough that my pregnant wife found the evidence before you could use it, which means you either estimated her or you were counting on me never to look closely at my own credenza. He looked at Vincent. Which one? Vincent said nothing. I'm going to need you to not leave the city, Adrian said. And I'm going to need the account structures for Kessler Holdings on my desk by end of day. All of them. And if I don't cooperate, then the photographs that Elena found, along with the Kessler documentation, go to the federal investigators directly with a cover letter explaining that they were planted by counsel, not by me. Your name is on the capitalization wire, Vincent, not mine. He picked up his phone from the table. I'll give you until noon to decide which version of this you want. He walked out. In the hallway outside the conference room, he leaned against the wall for 3 seconds and breathed. Phone buzzed. It was Sasha. Pharmacy footage came in. She walked east on Delancey, picked up a car at the corner of Delancey and 5th dark blue sedan, not a rideshare plate. Private car. Driver is a woman named Rose Adebayo, licensed livery operator with a home address in the Millbrook district. She drives exclusively female clients, mostly referrals through a domestic violence network, but also general private clients. She's careful about her passenger data. Adrian read it twice. Elena had found a driver through a women's network. She had been planning this long enough to locate a driver who would not share passenger information. He thought about the woman he had married, the one who'd said at dinner, on their first date, that she was either very perceptive or very stupid, and hadn't figured out which. He thought about the patience it must have taken to carry all of this for 6 weeks, while he sat in this house occupied with a manufactured crisis, while she photographed documents and made careful calls and planned an exit with engineering-level precision. He texted Sasha back, "Can you get to Rose Adebayo without her passenger data?" The response came, "I can try, no guarantees. Try. He pushed off the wall and walked back toward the main office. Danny Roth was standing in the hallway. This was not expected. Danny was 54, average height, with the kind of face that people forgot immediately after seeing it, which Adrian had always considered one of his useful qualities for financial operations. He had reddish hair going gray, and a way of holding himself that suggested mild anxiety was his resting state, which made him seem harmless in situations where harmless was a useful signal. He did not look mildly anxious now. He looked like a man who had already had a conversation he hadn't expected, and was working out what to do next. Adrian, he said. Danny. Adrian kept walking. Walk with me. Danny fell into step beside him. I heard Elena left, Danny said. Word travels. Marcus told me this morning. Danny hesitated. Is she okay? To your knowledge, Adrian said, still walking. Has anyone accessed the property account structures in the past 9 months outside of standard operational needs? The pause was briefer than Marcus's had been, quicker to cover. Danny was a man who had spent 30 years making numbers look the way someone needed them to look, and brief pauses were part of his professional toolkit. Need to pull the audit logs to Danny. Adrian stopped walking. He turned and looked at the man who had worked for him for 11 years, whose daughter was in her 3rd year of college on Adrian's dime. He looked at him steadily for a long moment. I'm going to give you the same thing I gave Vincent this morning. The truth, and then the question of which direction you want this to go. Danny's face had gone pale. Kessler Holdings, Adrian said. Danny's eyes closed briefly. Oh, he said quietly. Yeah. It wasn't... Adrian, I need you to understand. I was told it was... He stopped. Started. Vincent told me it was a sanctioned offshore structure. Operational security, surplus capital, protected from discovery. He said you'd approved it through a verbal arrangement because you didn't want it in writing. And you believed that. He's been your counsel for 12 years. He had access to everything. Why? Danny stopped again. His voice had gotten rough. He used my access codes. Said it was cleaner if the transfers looked like they came through property accounts. I thought it was legitimate. Did you think it was legitimate when the transfers totaled $4 million? Danny looked at the floor. I got scared, he said. By the time I understood what it was, there was enough of my access data on the transaction records that I looked like I'd built it myself. And Vincent knew that. He said if I made noise, the records pointed at me, and there was enough there to... He stopped. My daughter. She's in school. He stopped talking. The hallway was very quiet. Adrian looked at a man he'd known for 11 years, who had let himself be used as a tool against the organization that had kept his family from drowning, and who had stayed quiet out of fear for his daughter. He felt something that was not forgiveness and not rage, but something between them, the recognition of a human failure that was comprehensible and inexcusable at the same time. Did you know about the photographs? Adrian said. The surveillance shots. No, I swear to you. Only the accounts. Did you know it was designed to take me down? Danny looked up. His eyes were wet, which Adrian found he had no patience for, and also could not entirely blame. I told myself it was just money moving, that nobody was going to get hurt. My wife got hurt, Adrian said. She found evidence in my house that she thought put her and our child in danger, and she left. She's out there right now alone, because someone in this organization decided to use my house as a staging ground for my own elimination. Danny had no answer for that. You're going to write down everything, Adrian said. Every transfer, every instruction you received from Vincent, every conversation, every date. Full documentation. You're going to have it to Marcus by end of day. And then we figure out what happens next. Adrian started walking again. And Danny, if you speak to Vincent before end of day, I'll know it immediately. And the version of this where your daughter finishes, her degree goes away. He turned the corner toward his office and did not look back. Inside his office, he closed the door and stood with his back against it. His organization was fractured. His counsel had been running a 9-month operation against him from inside his own house. His accounts were bleeding. The Marchetti conflict, which had eaten the past 9 months of his life and consumed the last functional part of his marriage, was a fiction. And Elena was somewhere in this city, or possibly beyond it, having known about a version of this danger for 6 weeks and having said nothing to protect herself and their child because she had understood, correctly, That telling him would have folded her information into his crisis, and she would have disappeared into the margins again. He sat down at his desk. He pulled up his contacts and scrolled until he found a name he'd never had reason to use before, Dr. Patricia Osei. He didn't call her. He pulled up whatever information he had on her mutual connections, professional profile, the things a cautious man accumulates about the people in the peripheral orbits of his life. Elena had called someone for information, someone she trusted. The most likely person was either Carmen, her sister, or the friend from graduate school with the financial forensics background. If he could find Dr. Osei, and if Elena had reached out to her, there was a chance, not a certainty, but a chance that Osei knew where she was. He would not approach her directly. He was not going to frighten Elena's support network or give her reason to run further. But he needed to know she was safe. He needed that the way he'd never needed much of anything that wasn't operational before, and the unfamiliarity of the need sat in his chest like something with weight and edges. His phone buzzed. Sasha again. Rose Adebayo. She won't give me the passenger. But she did confirm. She dropped someone matching your wife's description at Millbrook Station last night at 11:42 p.m. Train, northbound, he read it. Northbound from Millbrook Station. 6 possible destinations within a 2-hour range. Elena had family in 2 of those directions. Carmen, who lived in a suburb called Harwick, a college friend whose name he was trying to pull from a 2-year-old memory of a dinner party conversation he'd only half attended. He was about to text Sasha back when his office door opened without a knock. This had never happened before. The man who walked in was not Marcus, not Danny, not anyone from his regular operation. It was a man named Garrett Foles, who ran the Marchetti organization's East Side territory, and who had absolutely no reason to be standing in Adrian's office at 10:30 on a Thursday morning. Garrett was 48 tall, with the particular physical stillness of a man who had made violence a professional habit, and no longer felt the need to signal it. He looked at Adrian across the office and said, "We need to talk about what Vincent Caruso promised us." And Adrian understood, in the specific way that a man understands something that reorders everything else in Sesame, that the situation had just moved into a different category entirely. Garrett Foles did not sit down. He stood in the middle of Adrian's office with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes doing the slow, methodical scan of the room that men in his profession did automatically. Exits, sightline, anything that could become a problem. It was not a threatening gesture, it was just habit, the way some people check their phone when they walk into a room. Garrett checked for danger. Adrian did not stand up. He stayed behind his desk with his hands flat on the surface and looked at the man across from him and said, "How did you get into this building? Your security is thinner than it was 6 months ago." Garrett's voice was unhurried. "You should probably address that. I'll take it under advisement." Adrian kept his voice even. "What did Vincent promise you?" Garrett pulled out the chair across from the desk, not asking, just pulling it out, and sat down. He crossed one leg over the other and looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who has come to deliver information rather than make threats, which in Adrian's experience was often more dangerous. 18 months ago, Garrett said, Vincent Caruso approached one of our people. Said he represented a faction within your organization that was open to a restructured arrangement with the East Side. Said the current leadership was increasingly a liability federal exposure, operational inflexibility, personal instability, and that a managed transition would benefit both sides. Adrian said nothing. He offered territorial access to 2 of your South Side properties, ongoing income from 3 of your account structures, and a clean handover of the Meridian Street operations within 12 months. Garrett looked at him steadily. In exchange, we agreed to apply enough pressure from the East Side to keep your attention occupied. The Marchetti conflict was calibrated. Not invented entirely, there were real tensions to work with. But the escalation, the timing, the specific incidents that kept requiring your personal involvement. Garrett made a small gesture with one hand. Those were managed. The office was very quiet. Adrian looked at the man across from him and thought about 9 months. 9 months of meetings, late nights, decisions made under manufactured pressure, resources redirected, attention consumed. 9 months of coming home, distracted and exhausted, to a wife who had stopped asking questions, because the look on his face when she asked them was the look of a man drowning in a problem he couldn't share. 9 months that someone had designed specifically to produce exactly that result. Vincent told us last week that the timeline was accelerating, Garrett continued. That there was a complication, something about documents being discovered, and that the transition needed to move up. He asked us to apply direct pressure on 2 of your people. Enough to shake the structure. Which 2 people? Marcus Coletti and your wife. The word landed in the room. Adrian's hands, flat on the desk, did not move. His face did not move. The only thing that changed was something behind his eyes, a very specific quality of stillness that the people who knew him well had learned to recognize as the most dangerous version of him, the one that didn't make noise. He asked you to apply pressure to my wife, Adrian said. He didn't specify method. He said she was a vulnerability, and that destabilizing her would destabilize you further, accelerate your loss of confidence, and make the transition easier. Garrett's voice remained level. We didn't touch her. I want you to understand that clearly. When I heard the specific ask, I pushed back. We agreed to limit contact to Coletti's operation. Why are you here? Garrett looked at him for a moment. Because what Vincent described to us and what's actually happening are 2 different things. He said this was a managed restructuring with your implicit awareness. Said you were planning an exit and needed cover. He paused. What I'm looking at right now is a man who had no idea any of this was happening, which means we've been used as instruments in something we didn't fully understand, and I don't operate that way. You have professional standards. I have practical ones. If this blows up and the federal attention that Vincent was supposedly managing lands on both our operations, I'm holding consequences for a plan I didn't design. Garrett uncrossed his legs and leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because the man who made promises to us is not going to be in a position to keep them. And I'd rather negotiate with the actual leadership of your organization than inherit the aftermath of someone else's miscalculation. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. You said he asked you to apply pressure to Marcus's operation, he said. What did that look like? 2 of Coletti's people were approached. Offered money to provide information about your schedule and movements. Did they take it? One did. Adrian let out a breath through his nose. Slow controlled. Which one? A man named Teo Rinaldi. Runs your East Side courier operation under Coletti's oversight. Teo Rinaldi was 29 years old. He had been with the organization for 6 years. Marcus had vouched for him personally. Does Marcus know? Not from us. Adrian picked up his phone, sent Marcus a single text, Teo Rinaldi. Right now. Where is he? The response came back in under a minute, office. Why? Keep him there. Don't tell him anything. I'm coming. He put the phone down and looked at Garrett Foles. I need 2 things from you, he said. First, everything Vincent communicated to your organization. In writing if you have it, audio if you have it, witness testimony if that's all you have. Second, a 48-hour agreement that nothing moves on the East Side while I deal with what's happening in my own house. Garrett considered him. What do I get? You get to have negotiated with me directly rather than inherited the fallout from Vincent's plan. Which means, when this is over, there's an actual conversation to be had about the East Side arrangement. A real one. Adrian met his eyes. Vincent was selling you access to things that weren't his to sell. I don't honor those terms, but I'm open to terms that are actually mine to offer. Garrett was quiet for a moment. 48 hours, he said. I'll have documentation to your man Coletti by end of day. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the office. He did not look back. Adrian sat alone for 30 seconds. Then he stood up, picked up his phone, and walked fast. Teo Rinaldi was sitting in the small operations office on the 2nd floor, eating a sandwich and reading something on his phone, when Adrian walked in with Marcus 2 steps behind. He looked up. He read the room in about 1 second. The sandwich went down on the desk. He was young. Adrian noticed this in a way he hadn't particularly before, the specific youth of him, the 29-year-old quality of a face that hadn't fully settled into what it was going to be. He had dark hair and the kind of unremarkable features that made him good at courier work, and right now he had the look of a man whose body had made the decision to run about 2 seconds before his brain caught up with the reasons not to. Don't, Marcus said, just the word. Teo didn't move. Adrian closed the office door. He stood in front of Teo's desk and looked at him. How many times, he said. Teo's mouth open, closed. How many times did you report my schedule to the East Side contact? Adrian, how many times? Teo looked at his hands on the desk. His jaw was working like he was trying to find a sentence that would help him and couldn't locate one. 7. Over 4 months. What did you tell them? Movement schedules. Meeting locations. When you were out of the city. His voice was barely above a threshold. Nothing operational. Nothing that would. You told them when I was out of the city, Adrian said. You told them my movement schedule, while someone was using that information to time account transfers and arrange surveillance. He stepped closer to the desk. Do you understand what you participated in? Teo looked up. His eyes were wet. I needed the money. My mother, there was a medical situation, and I didn't have. Don't. Adrian's voice cut through it. I've heard that sentence twice today already. It doesn't change what you did. I didn't know what they were going to use it for. I swear you thought it was acceptable to sell information about this organization to the East Side for money. Adrian looked at him steadily. Whatever you thought they were using it for doesn't matter. You made a decision. Own it. Teo was quiet. Marcus is going to take your full account of every contact, every piece of information, every instruction you received. Everything. Adrian looked at Marcus. Then we figure out containment. He walked out. In the hallway, he pressed his back against the wall and stood there. It was not yet noon. In the past 14 hours, he had come home to an empty bedroom, read his wife's letter, confirmed a $4 million internal theft, identified his legal counsel of 12 years as the architect of a takeover operation, discovered that the 9-month crisis consuming his life was manufactured, learned that his wife had been identified as a tactical vulnerability, and found a leak inside Marcus's own operational layer. He thought about Elena, about where she was right now, whether she'd slept, whether the baby was moving this morning the way she'd told him. In the rare moments she still described it to him. It sometimes moved in the early hours. He thought about the fact that Vincent Caruso had described Elena to a rival organization as a vulnerability to be destabilized. He thought about what that meant, that someone had looked at the woman carrying his child and assessed her value as a pressure point. Something moved through him that was below anger, deeper than anger. The kind of thing that anger is actually made of when you strip the noise away. He pushed off the wall. He had work to do. Vincent's documentation arrived at 12:58, not the end of day he'd been given, but nearly 2 hours early, which Adrian noted. A man who submitted documentation early was a man recalculating his position. A man who understood that early cooperation was the only card he had left to play. Adrian sat with it for an hour. The documentation was thorough. More thorough than he'd expected, which meant Vincent was either genuinely trying to negotiate survival or had been meticulous enough in his planning to have records he couldn't sanitize and had chosen to get ahead of them. The Kessler structure was laid out in full. 11 transfers. The Nevada shell, the equity entity, the capitalization wire from Caruso and Blanchard. The offshore accounts that Kessler fed into 3 of them, in jurisdictions that were difficult but not impossible for federal investigators to access if they had cause and cooperation. And then, buried in the last section of the documentation, something Adrian had not expected. A name. Not a name from his organization. Not a name from the Marchetti East Side. A name he recognized from a different context entirely from a federal case that had been publicly filed and publicly dismissed 18 months ago. The case that had generated the surveillance photographs of Adrian with the federal investigator. The investigator's name was Raymond Holt. He had been assigned to a task force focused on organized crime financial structures in the city. The task force had been disbanded after key evidence was ruled inadmissible on procedural grounds, and Holt had been reassigned to a regional office. The name in Vincent's documentation was not Holt. It was the name of the procedural attorney, who had successfully argued to have the task force's evidence excluded. The attorney was named Sandra Voss, Adrian's younger sister. He read the name 3 times. He sat very still. Sandra Voss had been a federal procedural attorney for 11 years. She and Adrian had not spoken in 4 years, a split that was mutual and old, and sourced in the kind of family fracture that happens when one sibling spends their career on the right side of a legal system, and the other spends theirs well outside it. It had been clean, necessary. He had respected it. She had respected it. They did not acknowledge each other professionally. According to Vincent's documentation, Sandra had been approached 14 months ago by a contact of Vincent's at the federal level. She had been offered information about her brother's organization specifically, information that could be used to build a prosecutable case in exchange for her assistance in a related procedural matter involving a different case entirely. The documentation did not say she had agreed. What it said was that she had met with the contact twice, and that after the second meeting, she had gone quiet, no further contact, no response to follow-up, and that Vincent had interpreted her silence as refusal, but had retained the record of the meetings as leverage, under the theory that even an attorney who had not cooperated with federal investigators carried significant pressure value if her brother believed she had. Adrian put the papers down. He sat at his desk and thought about what he was actually looking at. Vincent had built a file on Sandra, had been prepared, if Adrian survived the transition attempt, to suggest not prove, just suggest that Adrian's own sister had been cooperating with federal investigators. An accusation that inside the world Adrian operated in did not require proof to be lethal. Suggestion was enough. Suspicion was enough. People had been destroyed on less. Vincent had built a weapon aimed at Adrian's family and had kept it in reserve. His wife, his sister, his unborn child. Every relationship Adrian had outside of the organization had been assessed, cataloged, and prepared as a potential instrument. His phone buzzed. Sasha. Got something. Carmen Marcelli Elena's sister lives in Harwick. Neighbor reports seeing a woman matching description arrive by taxi last night around 1 a.m. Neighbor's not sure, but Elena has a connection there. Then a second message. Also, and you need to see this, I pulled security footage from Meridian Street, building entrance 6:45 a.m. this morning. Someone went into the building before your staff arrived. Used a service access code. A still image attached. Adrian opened it. The image was grainy. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. Showing the service entrance of the Meridian Street building. A woman, not Elena. He didn't recognize her immediately. Then he did. She was young mid-20s with dark hair pulled back. She worked for Vincent's law firm. He had seen her twice briefly at the firm's offices. A junior associate named Claire something. He didn't know her last name. She had gone into his building at 6:47 a.m., an hour before his staff arrived, with a service access code she should not have had. He called Marcus. Meridian Street, he said now. Lock it down. Nobody in or out who isn't our people. What's happening? Junior attorney from Caruso and Blanchard came into the building this morning before we opened. Service entrance. She had the code, a pause. What was she doing here? That is the question. Adrian was already moving. Pull every camera inside the building from 6:30 onward. I want to know exactly where she went. He was in the car in 4 minutes. The drive to Meridian Street took 11. Marcus met him at the entrance with his laptop already open, footage pulled up. They stood in the lobby, Adrian still in his coat, Marcus with 2 cups of coffee going cold on the security desk, and watched the footage in silence. Claire, whoever had used the service entrance at 6:47, had gone to the second floor, had entered the small operations office, the same office where Teo Rinaldi had been sitting an hour later eating his sandwich. She had spent 4 minutes in there. She had left carrying nothing visible. Had exited through the same service entrance at 6:51. She had a phone, Marcus said. He pointed at the frozen frame. Left hand. She was recording something or transmitting. What's in that office right now? Adrian said. Marcus looked at him. Teo's files, the courier operation records, route schedules, contact logs. Get Teo up here. Teo arrived looking like a man who had already had the worst morning of his life and was learning it wasn't over. Marcus explained what they'd seen and asked him directly what was in the office, that someone from Vincent's firm would want. Teo went still. There's a ledger, he said slowly. Physical. Paper. I kept a record of the contact payments, the East Side money. Because I was scared that if it ever came out, they'd say it was more than it was, and I wanted a record of the actual amounts. Where is the ledger? Locked drawer. Right side of the desk. Marcus crossed to the desk and tried the drawer. It was unlocked. He pulled it open. Empty. Teo made a sound that was not quite a word. She took it, Marcus said. Adrian looked at the empty drawer and understood what had just happened. The ledger that Teo had kept the physical record of payments from the East Side contact, in Teo's handwriting, with dates and amounts, was now in the hands of someone who worked for Vincent Caruso. It documented Teo's cooperation with the Marchetti East Side. It connected, through Teo's operation, to Marcus's oversight layer. It could be presented, to the right audience, as evidence of coordinated cooperation between Adrian's organization and the East Side's an exact opposite of what had actually been happening, which was a unilateral infiltration of Adrian's operation by a faction working with Vincent. The ledger in Vincent's hands was the piece that completed the frame, not just against Adrian, against Marcus, against the entire operational structure. Vincent had sent his person into the building this morning, before Adrian had confronted him, before the documentation exchange, before any of the morning's conversations, which meant he had planned for this contingency, before Adrian had shown his hand, which meant Vincent had known before this morning that something was moving, that he had sent the attorney in as a preemptive measure, which meant someone had told him. Someone had told him this morning, before 7 a.m., that Adrian was moving. Adrian turned and looked at Marcus. Marcus met his eyes. "Who did you call last night?" Adrian said. "After I called you at 11. Marcus's face was very still. "I called Danny. Told him to pull the account audit logs." "Who else?" A long pause. "I called Vincent," Marcus said. "I called him because I needed to understand the scope of what you'd found before I walked in this morning. I needed context." The lobby was very quiet. "You told Vincent last night that I'd found the documents," Adrian said. Marcus's jaw was tight. "I didn't tell him what specifically. I said there was a situation with the credenza documents and that you wanted to talk in the morning." That was enough. Adrian's voice had gone very flat. That was enough for him to send someone into this building before sunrise. "Adrian, I know what you were trying to do." He turned away from Marcus and stood facing the lobby entrance. He breathed twice, 3 times. "You were trying to give yourself the morning, to figure out where you stood before you walked in to talk to me. And in doing that, you gave Vincent a 6-hour window to move the one piece of physical evidence that ties his operation to this building." He turned back. "The 48 hours I negotiated with Foles," he said. "How much of that is actually reliable if Vincent gets to Foles before end of day and tells him the deal's changed?" Marcus was quiet. "It's not," Adrian said. "It's 48 hours of nothing." He picked up his phone. He called Sasha Harwick, he said. "Carmen Marcelli, I need you to go there. Do not approach Elena. Do not make contact with anyone in the house. I need you to be there as a set of eyes." "Why?" "Because Vincent Caruso's just played 2 moves I didn't see coming, which means he may have more in the sequence, and one of those moves was my wife, and he knows approximately where she is." He heard Sasha's breathing shift on the other end of the line. "Going now," she said. He hung up. He looked at Marcus across the lobby. "There are 3 things I need from you," Adrian said. "First, get Danny Roth into a room, and do not let him out of your sight. He's a witness and he's scared, and a scared witness talks to the wrong person. Second, pull every service code that's been used in this building in the past 30 days, and give me a list of every code that doesn't match current authorized personnel." 30 stopped. "Third," Marcus said. "Third, find Teo Rinaldi a place to be that isn't in any location Vincent knows about. Because Teo's ledger is gone, which means Teo is now a liability to Vincent's story, which means Teo is not safe." Marcus absorbed this. He nodded once. "I'm sorry," he said. "Calling Vincent last night. That was wrong." Adrian looked at him. "I know," he said, not forgiving it, not dismissing it. Just acknowledging that he knew Marcus knew, and that they were past the part where acknowledgement changed anything. He walked toward the exit. Outside, the city was doing its midday thing. Cars and movement, and the ordinary commerce of a day that had nothing to do with what was happening in Adrian's life. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at his phone and thought about the geometry of what he was facing. Vincent had the ledger, which meant he had a physical document connecting Adrian's building, Adrian's operational layer, and East Side Money, a document that, without context, looked like something it wasn't. Combined with the surveillance photographs of Adrian with the federal investigator, and the Kessler financial records structured to implicate Adrian's property accounts, Vincent now had a package. A package that could go to the federal task force. The same task force that had been rebuilt quietly, without public announcement, because that was how these things worked after a procedural dismissal under a different case number, with different lead investigators. People who didn't know that the original task force's evidence had been contaminated by the same legal firm that was now handing them new material. He thought about this. He thought about the fact that Sandra had met twice with a federal contact and then gone quiet, and that Vincent had interpreted that silence as refusal but had kept the record. He thought about Elena in Harwick, in her sister's house, who had seen enough in his credenza 6 weeks ago to understand that something dangerous was moving inside his organization, and had tried, on a Sunday afternoon at his kitchen table, to ask him about it in the most direct way she knew how. He thought about what she had written. Find out who's doing this to you. Fix it, or don't. But I'm done waiting to find out which one you'll choose. He had spent the entire morning finding out. Now came the part she hadn't written because she hadn't known if he was capable of it. He called a number he had not called in 4 years. It rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered. Careful. Professional. It's me, he said. A silence on the other end of the line. Adrian, his sister, said. I need to meet with you, he said. Today. Not at your office. Not at mine. Somewhere neutral. And Sandra, I need you to know before you answer that I'm not calling because I need legal cover. I'm calling because someone built a file on you to use against me, and you deserve to know what's in it. And I have about 12 hours before this situation moves into a place where that information becomes dangerous. Another silence. When Sandra spoke again, her voice had shifted, still careful, still precise, but with something underneath it that was the sound of a woman who had been waiting, without admitting she was waiting, for a call like this. There's a coffee place on Ardmore Street, she said. I'll be there in 45 minutes. He was already walking to his car. Sandra Voss was already at the corner table when Adrian walked in. She had chosen well back to the wall, sight line to the entrance, a cup of coffee she hadn't touched going cold in front of her. She was 47, lean, with the same dark coloring as Adrian, but arranged differently, more angular. The kind of face that looked like it had been sharpened by years of making arguments in rooms full of people who didn't want to hear them. She wore a gray coat and had her hair pulled back, and she watched him cross the room toward her with an expression that gave away nothing and communicated everything. She had been expecting something like this. Not this specifically. Something. Adrian sat down across from her without taking his coat off. You look terrible, she said. Elena left last night. Something moved across Sandra's face, brief. Is she safe? I think so. I'm working on confirming. He put both hands flat on the table. Vincent Caruso built a file on you. 2 meetings you had with a federal contact 14 months ago. He was holding it as leverage the suggestion that you'd cooperated with investigators. Not the proof, just the suggestion. Enough to make people in my world ask questions that don't need answers to do damage. Sandra looked at him steadily. I met with the contact twice, she said. I refused what they were asking. I reported the approach to my supervisor and was told to document it and disengage, which I did. I know. Vincent's record of those meetings without context looks like... I know what it looks like. Adrian held her gaze. I'm not here to ask you about it. I'm here because you need to know it exists and because I need to tell you what's in motion today. He paused. Vincent is assembling a package for federal investigators. Surveillance photographs of me with Holt from 18 months ago, financial records, structured to make it look like I built the Kessler operation myself, and a physical ledger taken from my building this morning that ties my operational layer to East Side money. Sandra was quiet. The photographs of you and Holt, she said carefully. Those meetings, were they voluntary? He approached me. Both times. Both times I declined and walked away. And you didn't report the approaches? No. Adrian. She said his name the way she used to when they were younger, and he'd done something that made her want to put her face in her hands. Not angry, tired in a specific, precise way. I know, he said. Without a contemporaneous record that those meetings were initiated by Holt and rejected by you, the photographs read as... I know what they read as. She picked up her coffee, looked at it, put it down. What do you need? I need to know whether a federal package assembled from planted evidence and structured financial records can survive procedural challenge if the assembly itself is documented as originating with the attorney who built the frame. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. If you can demonstrate that the evidence was fabricated and delivered by counsel who had a material interest in the outcome, she said slowly, and if the documentation of that fabrication is itself clean and verifiable, then yes. Package falls apart at intake if it's challenged correctly. She looked at him. But it has to be challenged immediately, before the investigators build a case architecture around it. Once they've got a grand jury moving, how long do I have? If Vincent delivers the package today, they move fast. These things don't sit on desks. 48 hours, maybe 72, before there's a formal structure you can't procedurally interrupt. 48 hours. The same window he'd negotiated with Garrett Foles, which was now worth nothing. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Marcus. Get Danny in a room. Start the written documentation now. Every transfer, every instruction, every date. I need it clean and witnessed by end of day. He looked back at Sandra. If I bring you the documentation, he said. Vincent's records. Danny Roth's account. Garrett Foles' statement about what Vincent promised the East Side. The Kessler capitalization wire. All of it. Can you make a procedural intervention that stops the package before it becomes a case? Sandra looked at her brother across the table. 4 years of silence. 4 years of a clean, mutually respected distance built on the understanding that their lives had moved in directions that couldn't coexist. She had built a career on the integrity of systems he operated outside of. They had both understood this and honored it, and now they were sitting across from each other in a coffee shop on Ardmore Street because someone had decided to use that distance as a weapon. If the documentation is clean, she said. Yes, it will be clean. Adrian. She held his eyes. If I do this, I'm filing a formal complaint against Vincent Caruso with the Bar Association and alerting the federal office to the evidence fabrication. This doesn't stay quiet. It goes on the record. I know. And anything I surface during that process that pertains to your organization's operations, anything that comes up independently of the fabrication case, I can't bury that. I won't. I'm not asking you to bury anything. She studied him. You're serious. I'm choosing differently than I have been, he said. That's the most I can tell you right now. She was quiet for a long moment. Send me the documentation, she said. Everything you have. My personal email, not the office. She stood up and put on her coat. And find Elena. Whatever else is happening, find her. I'm working on it. She paused at the table. She called me. 3 weeks ago, Adrian went still. She was asking about procedural protections for a hypothetical person who had found evidence of financial crimes and wasn't sure whether coming forward would create more danger than staying quiet. Sandra's voice was careful. I told her that a person in that situation should document everything and get it to someone who could act on it through proper channels. She didn't tell me she called you. She didn't know I was your sister. I use my married name professionally. She found me through a referral chain. Sandra picked up her bag. She's a very careful woman. I know she is. She's also very scared, Sandra said. And she's doing it all by herself. Get that right before anything else. She walked out. Adrian sat at the table alone for 90 seconds, long enough to let the information settle into its proper weight, and then he stood up and went back to work. A call from Sasha came at 2:47. Adrian was in the car, halfway back to Meridian Street, when the phone rang, and Sasha's voice came through without a greeting, which meant bad news at speed. There's a car, Sasha said, parked on the street outside Carmen Marcelli's house in Harwick. Dark gray. It's been there since noon. 2 men inside, they haven't moved. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. Vincent's people. That's my read. They're not police wrong posture, wrong patients. These are people used to waiting for a specific thing to happen. Are they watching the house, or are they waiting for a window? Watching for now. But it's been 3 hours, which means they're either very patient or they've been told to hold until they get a signal. If Vincent delivers his package to the feds and then decides he needs to eliminate the variables, Elena becomes a variable, Sasha said. She's got the copies of the documents she found. She's a witness to what was in that credenza. If Vincent's building a narrative that those documents were legitimately gathered, she contradicts the narrative. Adrian's voice was flat. She can testify that the documents were planted in my home, which ties back to Caruso and Blanchard. He was already calculating. How many people do you have? I'm solo right now. I called you before I did anything. Can you get 2 more people to that street in the next 30 minutes? Yes. Do it. Nobody moves on the car yet. He stopped. Thought. I need Elena to agree to move. She's not going to respond well to being extracted without her consent, And if she refuses and we have a confrontation on her sister's street, you need to call her. I don't have her number. She turned off her phone. Carmen's number? I don't have it. A brief pause. I can get Carmen's number in 4 minutes. Get it. He hung up. He sat in traffic on the expressway on-ramp and looked at the brake lights ahead of him and thought about Elena in a house in Harwick, not knowing there were 2 men sitting in a gray car at the end of her sister's street, waiting for a signal from a man who had decided she was a variable. He thought about the letter. I refuse to teach our child that the people who are supposed to love you most get to treat you like a footnote. He'd spent 20 years building an organization predicated on control, and the one person he should have protected had been forced to protect herself because he was too occupied with manufactured crises to see what was happening in his own house. He was not going to sit in traffic while she was in danger. He cut across 2 lanes, took the next exit, and pushed the car faster on surface streets. Sasha sent Carmen's number at 3:02. He called it while driving. It rang 3 times. A woman answered, younger than Elena's voice, with the particular wariness of someone who has been told to be careful about calls. Carmen Marcelli, he said. This is Adrian. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you not to hang up. Silence. Is Elena there? More silence, then. What do you want? There are 2 men in a gray car at the end of your street. They've been there since noon. They're not police. I need Elena to know that, and I need her to be willing to move to somewhere safer in the next 20 minutes. A sharp intake of breath. How do you know where we... I've been looking for her since midnight. Not to bring her back. Not to Carmen. Listen to me. The situation with my organization is more dangerous than Elena knew when she left, and the people who created that situation know approximately where she is. I need her to move. A muffled sound, Carmen moving. A door, voices he couldn't make out. Then Elena's voice. He hadn't heard her voice in 31 hours, and the specific quality of it, careful, controlled, the voice of a woman who had decided not to give anything away, hit him somewhere under the sternum, in a way he didn't have time to sit with. Adrian, she said. Are you okay? I'm fine. A pause. How did you find us? Security footage from the pharmacy. Description from your driver. I told Sasha to go to Harwick, and be eyes only she wasn't supposed to approach. I'm sorry. I should have told you I was looking. He heard himself and made himself slow down. Elena. There are 2 men watching Carmen's house. I think they're Vincent Caruso's people. A silence. You found the credenza documents, she said. Everything. I spent last night going through it. I know about Kessler. I know about the photographs. I know Vincent built a frame against me, and I know he used my operational layer to do it, and I know about Marchetti, and I know about Danny, and I know... He stopped. I know you tried to tell me 3 weeks ago, and I didn't hear it. Another silence. When she spoke, her voice was not the voice of a woman who had been waiting to be vindicated. It was the voice of a woman who was very tired and very scared, and had been managing both by herself for too long. What do you need me to do? She said. I need you to let Sasha move you. Somewhere Vincent doesn't know about, just for 24 hours while I close this. And then we figure out the rest, not over the phone. In person. He paused. I found the ultrasound photograph in the envelope. She was quiet. Elena, I heard you. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to do anything except let Sasha get you somewhere safe so I can do what I should have done 9 months ago, which is pay attention to the right things. A long pause. 24 hours, she said. 24 hours. And Adrian. Her voice was steady and specific. If this is just about the danger and not about anything else, tell me now. I need to know what I'm agreeing to. He drove through an intersection and came out onto the bridge that crossed the Harwick River and looked at the water for exactly 2 seconds. It's about everything, he said. I just need you safe first, before I have the right to say that. The line was quiet for long enough that he thought she might have hung up. I'll go with Sasha, she said. He exhaled. Thank you, he said. She ended the call. At 4:15, Marcus called. Danny's done. Full written account witnessed by 2 people, dated and signed. Tio gave a secondary statement corroborating the East Side contact timeline. And I've got the Kessler wire documentation from the bank. The origination routing confirms Caruso and Blanchard. A pause. It's clean. Send everything to Sandra. The email address I'm about to text you. Sandra, Marcus absorbed that. Your sister. She's filing a procedural challenge to intercept Vincent's federal package before it becomes a formal case. She needs the documentation today. A longer pause. You're bringing your sister into this. She's already in it. Vincent put her there. Adrian turned onto the highway on-ramp. How's Vincent? Quiet. Which worries me more than anything else he could be doing. He's waiting to see if his package moves. That's my read too. Marcus's voice was tight. Adrian, if he's already delivered it, then Sandra moves on the procedural challenge and we have 48 hours before the case structure builds. I know, he changed lanes. What about Garrett Foles? Has he sent the documentation he promised? Just came in. 20 minutes ago. Audio files and a written summary of every communication between his organization and Vincent's contact. Dates, amount, specifics. A pause, it's solid. If it's real. Foles came to me voluntarily. He has more to lose from Vincent's story than from mine right now. I know. Marcus stopped. I should have told you earlier. About the accounts. About the surveillance photographs. I was running it down, and I told myself I needed more before I brought it to you, and that's... Marcus, Adrian cut him off, not unkindly, just cleanly. We're going to have that conversation later, and it's going to be a long one. Right now I need you operational. Later we settle what needs to be settled between us. A brief silence. Understood, Marcus said. Adrian hung up. He sent Sandra the email address text, and then sent a follow-up, documentation coming from Marcus Coletti within the hour. Audio from Foles' organization also included. I need you to move as fast as you can. Her response came back in 2 minutes, already on it. I contacted a colleague in the federal office this afternoon, someone I trust, and flagged that evidence fabrication may be incoming from a compromised source. They're aware to hold any new packages from Caruso and Blanchard pending review. He read it twice. She had started before he'd even brought her the documentation. She had been ready to move the moment she had his confirmation. He thought about what she had said at the coffee shop. She called me. 3 weeks ago, Elena had called his sister. Sandra had told her to document everything and get it to someone through proper channels. Elena had documented everything and put it in an envelope and left it against a suitcase on the floor of their bedroom for him to find. The 2 women in his life had been quietly coordinating a response to his crisis while he was lost inside it. He felt something that might have been gratitude and might have been shame, and was probably both at once, layered in a way that couldn't be separated. He was 20 minutes from Meridian Street when his phone rang again. Unknown number, he answered. Adrian Voss. The voice was male flat, with the specific cadence of a man reading from a mental script. My name is Agent Raymond Holt. I think you know who I am. Adrian said nothing. I'm going to assume from your silence that you're deciding whether to hang up, Holt continued. Don't. I'm calling to tell you that approximately 2 hours ago my office received a package from an attorney named Vincent Caruso. I'm also calling to tell you that 30 minutes ago, a colleague of mine in the procedural division received a flag from an attorney named Sandra Voss about the provenance of that package. Adrian waited. I've looked at both, Holt said, the package and the flag. I'm a careful person, Mr. Voss, which is probably why I've been doing this job for 11 years without a major procedural collapse. And what I'm looking at is a situation where the same attorney's firm appears on both the evidence I received and the capitalization wire for the entity that evidence is supposed to document. Which means the package is compromised, Adrian said. Which means I have a problem, Holt said. Because I can't build a case on fabricated evidence, but I also can't pretend I haven't seen what I've seen, which includes photographs of you meeting with me that I haven't been able to find any record of in my own documentation of those encounters. You didn't document the approaches. I documented one. Not both. And the one I documented matches your account of it, an unsolicited approach that you declined. A pause. The second photograph is from an encounter I have no record of. It didn't happen, I believe you, which is frankly what creates my problem. Holt paused again. Mr. Voss, I'm not calling to make you an offer. I don't make offers over the phone. I'm calling because I need to tell you that Vincent Caruso is in my office right now. He walked in 40 minutes ago without an appointment and has been talking for the past half hour in a way that suggests he understands the package is compromised and is trying to reframe his own position as a whistleblower rather than a fabricator. Adrian felt the floor of the situation shift under him. He flipped, he said. He's attempting to, Holt said carefully. What he's describing is a version of events in which he was coerced into building the documentation against you by, and I want to be precise here, by pressure from the East Side Marchetti organization, who he claims were threatening his firm's clients. He's putting the fabrication on Marchetti. He's building a story. Whether it holds depends on what your documentation says and how clean it is. Holt's voice was still flat and professional. I'm giving you this information because your sister has 12 years of professional integrity, and when she flags something in my office, I take it seriously. And because what I actually want, Mr. Voss, is the truth of what happened in the past 9 months. Not a conviction, not a scalp. The truth. Adrian was quiet for 3 seconds. You're going to have it by end of day, he said. Then I'll be here. Holt paused once more. For what it's worth, I'm sorry the second photograph exists. Those meetings were your right to decline, and they were documented in a way that was used against you. That's a problem in my own house. The line clicked. Adrian sat in the car on the highway and breathed. Vincent was in Holt's office, trying to save himself by redirecting the frame toward Marchetti, which meant the Marchetti, East Side was about to have federal attention land on them from a direction they hadn't expected, which meant Garrett Foles's 48-hour agreement was now worth nothing, because Foles was about to find out that his own name was being mentioned in a federal office, which meant Foles's 2 men, watching Carmen's house in Harwick, might get a very different set of instructions very quickly. Called Sasha. Where's Elena? Moving. We're 20 minutes out from the location. Move faster. Adrian Foles is about to learn his name is being mentioned to federal investigators. His patience with the 48 hours disappears the moment he finds out. The men on the street, I understand. Sasha's voice shifted, the professional, calm tightening into something more operational. I'm moving her now. He heard the phone rustle, heard Elena's voice somewhere in the background, asking something he couldn't make out. Heard Sasha answer her in a low, urgent tone. He kept the phone to his ear and drove. He was going to Meridian Street. He needed Marcus with the documentation, needed it sent to Sandra and to Holt simultaneously. Needed it done in the next 20 minutes, before Vincent finished his reframe in Holt's office and the narrative hardened into something that required more than a procedural challenge to break. He turned off the highway. His phone buzzed against his ear, a second call coming in. Marcus's name. He switched over. Talk, he said. Vincent's people, Marcus said. His voice was wrong, too fast, too tight. The ones watching Harwick. They just moved. Adrian's stomach dropped. What do you mean moved? Car's gone from the street. Sasha just reported it. They pulled out 3 minutes ago, and we don't know where they went. Adrian ran a red light. Get me 2 people to Elena's location right now, he said. Whatever you have available, whoever's closest, get them there. Already on it. But Adrian Marcus stopped. What? The gray car, Marcus said. Sasha got a plate when they pulled out. I ran it. It's registered to a leasing company in Meridian's East District. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. The leasing company is a subsidiary of Caruso and Blanchard. Adrian processed this. They're not Foles's people, he said. No. They're Vincent's. Yes. Vincent, who is currently sitting in Agent Holt's office building a reframe that redirected everything toward the Marchetti East Side. Vincent, who had sent Junior Attorney Claire into Adrian's building at 6:47 in the morning. Vincent, who had built a file on Sandra. Vincent, who had described Elena to Garrett Foles as a vulnerability to be destabilized. Vincent, who had decided 3 hours ago that his package was compromised and had walked into a federal office to start over with a new story, and who had, before walking in, given instructions to the people in the gray car. Adrian pushed the car to 90 on the surface street. How far is Sasha from the safe location, he said. 12 minutes. Where's the gray car? We lost it. Marcus's voice was tight. It went north on Ardmore, and we lost visual. Ardmore Street. The same street where Sandra's coffee shop was. Adrian's mind ran the geometry in 1 second flat. Sandra, he said. Marcus went quiet. Ardmore Street. Sandra met me there this afternoon. If Vincent knows I contacted her, he'd know through the federal office. If Holt mentioned Sandra's flag to anyone in the building, and Vincent has a contact. Adrian was already dialing Sandra. The phone rang. Rang again. Rang a third time, went to voicemail. He left no message. Dialed again. On the second call, she picked up on the 5th ring. Sandra. His voice came out harder than he intended. Where are you right now? I'm in my car. Leaving the federal building, I had to go in person to hand-deliver some of the documentation to my contact. A pause. Why? There's a gray car. 2 men, they may be coming to you. A silence. Adrian. Her voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath it. There's a gray car behind me. Has been for the past 6 blocks. He ran another red light. Drive to the nearest police precinct, he said. Don't go to your office. Don't go home. Straight to the nearest precinct and walk in the front door. I know how this works, she said. I've been a federal attorney for 11 years. I know, drive. He heard the sound of her car accelerating. I'm going, she said. He was 6 minutes from Meridian Street, 12 minutes from Elena's location, and his sister was being followed on Ardmore Street, and he could not be in 3 places at once. He called Marcus back. Sandra's being followed on Ardmore. She's driving to a precinct. I need someone to on it. Marcus, I have someone on Ardmore in 4 minutes. I'm on it. He gripped the wheel. The city moved around him, indifferent as always, and Adrian Voss drove through it, with his wife's voice in his ear from 2 hours ago, 24 hours. And Adrian, if this is just about the danger and not about anything else, tell me now. And he thought about how much of his life he had spent managing threats to an organization and how little of it he had spent protecting what the organization was supposed to be for. And he thought about a nursery with gray-green walls that he had looked at once and said, looks great without sensing. And he thought about an ultrasound photograph that showed the shape of his child's face. And he pressed the car harder through the last intersection before Meridian Street and came in fast and stopped hard and was out of the car before the engine had fully quit. Marcus was at the entrance. Sandra's good, Marcus said immediately. My person got eyes on her. She made it to the 12th precinct. She's inside. Adrian breathed. Elena, Sasha's at the location. They're inside. Doors locked. Marcus looked at him. He looked like a man who had aged 4 hours in the past 30 minutes. The gray car's still dark. We don't have a location. Vincent's in Holt's office. I know. Which means he doesn't have direct comms with the car right now. They're sitting on instructions he gave before he walked in. What were the instructions? Marcus looked at him. We don't know, he said. Adrian looked at his second-in-command of 19 years and felt the specific weight of everything that word covered: the manufactured crisis, the warning not given, the call to Vincent at 11 p.m. that had cost them 6 hours and a ledger. Okay, he said, here's what happens now. He walked inside. Marcus followed. In the operations room on the 2nd floor, Danny Roth was at the table with his written documentation in front of him, looking like a man who had made a decision he wasn't sure he'd survive and was committed to it anyway. Teo Rinaldi was in a separate room with the door closed. The Foles audio files were loaded on a laptop. Adrian sat down. He looked at Danny. You're going to talk to Agent Holt today, he said. In person. Everything you told me, everything you wrote down, you tell him directly. With a lawyer present, not Vincent, obviously someone Sandra can recommend. Danny nodded once. Marcus is going to deliver the full documentation package to Sandra, and she's going to walk it into Holt's office and put it on the desk while Vincent is still in the building. He looked at Marcus. That documentation, Kessler, the wires, Holt's audio. Danny's account lands on Holt's desk while Vincent is sitting across from him, trying to reframe himself as a coerced party. And Holt reads it in the same room where Vincent is building his new story. Marcus absorbed this. That ends Vincent's reframe, he said. That ends Vincent, Adrian said. He stood up. I need to be somewhere in the next 30 minutes, he said. You can run this without me. Marcus looked at him. Elena, as I said. It wasn't a question. It's been 31 hours, Adrian said. The documentation is done. Sandra's in motion. You can close this. He met Marcus's eyes. Close it. Something moved across Marcus's face, complicated, old. The face of a man who understood that an ERSA was ending and was deciding how he felt about that. Go, he said. Adrian walked out. He was in the car before he let himself feel any of it, the exhaustion that had been sitting under everything since 11 the night before, the specific terror of Sandra's phone going to voicemail 4 times, the sound of Elena's voice saying 24 hours in the careful tone of a woman who had learned to protect herself from hope. He had 52 minutes of driving ahead of him. He drove in silence. No music, no calls. Just the road and the movement of the car and the city giving way gradually to the kind of neighborhoods where people put up Christmas lights in November and kept small boats in their driveways and didn't know what was happening in the operations. room on the second floor of the Meridian Street building. His phone buzzed once, at the 40-minute mark. Sandra, documentation delivered. Holt read the Kessler wire in front of Vincent. Vincent stopped talking. He read it twice. Then it's over on this end. Go find your wife. He put the phone face down on the passenger seat. The address Sasha had sent him was a house in a neighborhood called Millfield, 12 minutes past the Harwick boundary. Small street, old trees overhanging the road, the kind of quiet that was real quiet, not the quiet of a house where everyone had simply stopped making noise. He pulled up in front of it at 6:44 in the evening. The house had a light on in the front room. He sat in the car for a moment. He thought about everything he was going to say, all the things he needed to say the apology that wasn't going to be one sentence, but many sentences, specific sentences, the kind that named exact things rather than gesturing at general failure. Thought about how to say them without making them about him, without making his regret into a thing she had to manage, without performing the remorse rather than simply having it. He got out of the car. He walked to the front door. He knocked. He heard movement inside. A low voice Sasha's, he thought. Then footsteps. The door opened. Elena stood in the doorway, in the particular way of a woman who had been expecting this moment and had still not fully decided how to receive it. She was wearing a dark blue sweater he recognized from 2 winters ago. Her hair was down. She looked exhausted and careful and more pregnant than he remembered, which was a thought that landed somewhere complicated, because he realized he had not actually looked at her, really looked, with full attention, in long enough that the changes in her body were surprising to him. She was carrying his child. She had been carrying his child alone for 7 months. He stood on the step below her and looked at her. She looked back. "Vincent's done," he said. Sandra got the documentation to Holt. "It's being processed." She nodded once. "You and the baby are safe," he said. "Sasha can confirm the gray car is off the board." She nodded again. "I have a lot more to say than that," he said. He stopped. He had rehearsed this, and now the rehearsal felt wrong, felt like the wrong register. He let it go. "I missed you. That's the beginning of it. I missed you while you were in the same house, and I didn't let myself know I was missing you, and that was the failure." Before everything else, Elena was quiet. The night was quiet. Somewhere in the house, Sasha moved around in a way that suggested she was very deliberately giving them the room. "Come in," Elena said finally. Not forgiveness, not a welcome back. Just the door opening. He stepped inside, and she closed it behind him, and they stood in the small front room of a stranger's house in Millfield. With everything still to be said between them, and outside the gray car was gone, and the documentation was on Holt's desk, and the city was doing its ordinary evening things without caring at all, and this was the moment, Adrian understood, that nothing after it would get to ignore. They stood in the front room of a house that belonged to neither of them, surrounded by other people's furniture and other people's photographs on the walls. And the specific strangeness of the setting had the accidental effect of making everything feel stripped down to what it actually was. 2 people and the full weight of what had happened between them, with nowhere to put it except directly on the table. Sasha peered briefly in the doorway to the kitchen, met Adrian's eyes, and disappeared. A door closed somewhere toward the back of the house. The sound of her being deliberately absent. Elena moved to the couch and sat down with the careful deliberateness of a woman in her 3rd trimester who had learned that every physical movement required more planning than it used to. She pulled her feet up slightly, not quite tucked under her, and looked at him standing in the middle of the room, still in his coat. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you've been running since last night." "I have been. I know. Sasha told me some of it." She watched him take off his coat and fold it over the arm of the chair across from her and sit down. "Vincent's really done." Sandra filed the procedural challenge at 4 o'clock. Holt read the Kessler documentation in Vincent's presence. Danny Roth's written account corroborates the account structure. The Foles audio files confirm the Marchetti conflict was engineered. He paused. Vincent stopped talking about 20 minutes into it. What happens to him? Bar disbarment at minimum. Federal charges for evidence fabrication, financial fraud, conspiracy. He'll spend the next 2 years deciding how much he cooperates and with whom. Adrian looked at his hands. He built a very thorough case against himself while trying to build one against me. Elena was quiet for a moment. "The gray car," she said. The men outside Carmen's, they were Vincent's, not Foles's. When Vincent walked into the federal building and started talking, his leverage over everyone around him evaporated. The two men in the car had instructions from before he went in. When he stopped being in a position to pay them or protect them, they made a calculation. And left, he looked at her. You were never in direct danger. But the potential was there, and I needed you not to be anywhere it could reach you. Elena absorbed this. You talked to Sasha about the safe location before you talked to me, she said. I didn't have your number. You could have called Carmen first. I called Sasha because I needed eyes on that street before I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I called you as soon as I understood the shape of the threat. He paused. I know the order of it looks like the wrong priority. It looks like you managed the operational problem and then made the personal call. He sat with that. Yes, he said, that's what it looks like, because that's what it was. And I'm not going to tell you it was the wrong call logistically, because it wasn't. I needed Sasha there before I knew whether calling you directly would put you in a situation where you were reacting to incomplete information. But I understand that from where you're sitting, it reads as another version of the same pattern. Elena looked at him with the engineering precision he'd always found simultaneously clarifying and slightly terrifying. Does it feel different to you? She said. When you make that calculation now versus 6 months ago. He thought about it. Actually thought about it, instead of reaching for the answer that would move the conversation forward. Yes, he said. 6 months ago I wouldn't have noticed I was making it. I would have just done it and moved on. Tonight I made it and knew what I was doing and why and what it was going to cost. And I did it anyway because I thought the outcome justified it. He looked at her. I don't know if that's better, or just more self-aware, while still being the same thing. Elena was quiet. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in about a year, she said. I know. The room held that for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the small street, its headlights swinging briefly across the window. The house settled in the way old houses did, a small creak, some minor negotiation of wood and foundation. The light in the front room was warm and slightly inadequate, the kind of lamp that does its best. I found your credenza documents 6 weeks ago, Elena said. I photographed everything. I did the research. I made the calls. I spent 3 weeks building a picture of what was happening in your organization, and then I sat across from you on such a Sunday afternoon and asked you one question, and you looked at me and said, I've got it. She looked at him steadily. And I watched you pick up your phone. I know. I need you to understand what that moment was, she said. Because it wasn't about the phone. It was about the fact that you looked at me asking you for the truth, and you made a calculation that I didn't need it. That managing me was the right call. She paused. And you made that calculation so fast, you probably didn't even know you were making it. He didn't say anything. That's when I knew I was leaving, she said. Not because of the danger, not because of Vincent or the documents or any of it. Because you looked at me and decided I was someone to be managed rather than someone to be told the truth. And you did it in half a second without any apparent awareness that you'd done it. And I thought, I cannot raise a child in a house where the person I'm supposed to be building a life with treats me like a department he oversees. The words landed in the room and did not bounce back. Adrian sat with them. He did not defend himself. He did not explain the pressure he'd been under, or the manufactured nature of the crisis, or any of the contextual factors that were real and true and beside the point. He just sat with what she'd said and let it be what it was. You're right, he said, and I don't have a version of it that makes it something other than what it was. Elena looked at him for a long time. What did you do today? She said. Tell me what you actually did so, he told her. From the moment he'd opened the envelope on the bedroom floor to the call from Sasha about the pharmacy footage to the conversation with Marcus in the kitchen to Vincent's office and Danny's account and Tio's empty. Drawer and Garrett Foles walking in without a knock. He told her about Sandra, watched Elena's face when he said Sandra's name and saw the brief flicker of something that was recognition. He told her about the coffee on Ardmore and Sandra's 45-minute response time, and what she'd said at the end, find Elena before anything else. He told her about Holt's call on the highway and the documentation delivered, and Vincent going silent in a federal office at 4 p.m. He told her about driving the last 52 minutes in silence. He told it plainly, in sequence, without editorializing, the way he used to tell her things in the first year of their marriage, when he'd trusted, that she could hear the truth and handle it without needing it cushioned. When he finished, Elena was quiet for a while. Sandra said to find me first, she said. Yes. She said that before the documentation was delivered. Yes. Elena looked at the middle distance somewhere between them. She's a good person. She is. The 4 years you've been out of contact with her, was that because of the work? What you do? Mutual decision. She needed clean separation for her career. I respected it. Did you miss her? He thought about it. I didn't let myself, he said. I didn't let myself, he said, which is probably the same answer given you 6 months ago if you'd asked whether I missed you while we were in the same house. Elena looked at him sharply. I know, he said. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like you spent a long time not letting yourself feel things, because feeling them was inconvenient. Yes, and now you're feeling them. I don't have a choice anymore. Everything I tried to insulate myself from is sitting right in front of me. He looked at her directly. You are sitting right in front of me. The room was quiet. Elena put one hand on her stomach, a gesture that he didn't think was deliberate, just reflexive. The unconscious touch of a woman who had been doing it for months, the hand finding its way there without instruction. He watched her hand on her stomach. She moved today, Elena said. Around noon, while Sasha was driving. 3 times in a row, which she doesn't usually do. He processed the pronoun. She, he said. Elena looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile. More the shadow of one, the ghost of the expression that would have been easy between them once. I found out at the 28-week appointment, she said. The one you weren't at. He exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, he said. Not the reflexive apology, the specific one, aimed precisely. I'm sorry for the appointment. I'm sorry for the room you painted alone. I'm sorry for the Sunday dinners and the ultrasound photographs, and every time you tried to tell me something, and I gave you the phone face. I'm sorry for asking you to live inside a marriage where you were doing all the living, and I was just occupying space. Elena's jaw moved. She looked at the window. Those are the right things to be sorry for, she said. I know there are more. Tell me the others. She looked back at him. You want me to list them? I want to know what I did. Specifically. I don't want to apologize in general. General apologies are easy. I want to know the specific things so I can know what I'm actually accounting for. Something moved across her face. Not softness, exactly. She wasn't at softness yet, and he wasn't asking her to be. More like the recognition that this was different. That this version of the conversations was different from the one she'd been braced for. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, March 17th. You said tomorrow. I asked if you wanted to feel her move, and you said tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and you left at 6 a.m., she paused. I waited until 7 to accept that you weren't going to remember. And then I made coffee, and I stood at the kitchen window, and I thought, this is what the next 20 years looks like. And I thought it without anger, which was the worst part. I'd already started grieving it. He listened. The painter, she said. I called 3 times. You kept saying you'd handle it. So I did it myself. And when you came home and saw it, you said looks great without looking at it. And I know that sounds small. I know it sounds like the kind of thing that people say isn't a real problem. But it was the accumulation of it. Every single time I handled something alone, and you registered it as handled and moved on. The accumulation of being invisible inside my own marriage. It doesn't sound small, he said. The calls I stopped making, she said. Do you know I stopped telling you about the appointments because your face when I brought them up made me feel like a problem you were managing? I have spent the last 7 months deciding what was safe to tell you and what would just add to your load, and that is not a marriage. That is being a considerate tenant in someone else's life. He did not look away. I know, he said. I know that's what it became. And I don't have an explanation that makes it not that. I'm not asking for an explanation. I know. He stopped. I want you to know I understand what I did. Not as a general concept. I understand the painter and the 17th and the calls you stopped making. I understand that you spent 7 months protecting me from feeling the weight of my own absence, and that is not something I get to take for granted. Elena was quiet for a long time. Outside, the street was fully dark now. The old trees were shadows against the slightly lighter sky, and the small house held its warmth against the November cold, and somewhere in the back Sasha was being quiet in a way that cost her something. I'm not coming home tomorrow, Elena said. I know. I need time, not because I don't. She stopped. Started again. Not because the feelings aren't there. They are. They've been there the whole time, which was its own particular misery. But I need to know what I'm coming back to before I come back to it. I need to see the thing you say you're choosing actually be chosen, not just said. What does that look like, he said. Tell me specifically. She looked at him. It looks like you dismantling the parts of the organization that created this situation, she said. Not all of it. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not overnight. But the Kessler structure, the offshore accounts, the components that created the federal exposure. Those go. They're already going. Sandra's process requires full disclosure of the financial structures to demonstrate the fabrication. I can't keep what I have to document. It's convenient that dismantling it also helps you legally. Yes, he said, I know that. I'm not going to pretend the timing makes it a purely principled decision. What I can tell you is that I would have said yes to this conversation either way. She studied him. The Marchetti situation, she said. The East Side relationship. Garrett Foles came to me voluntarily this morning. He was used by Vincent the same way Danny and Tio were used, given partial information and positioned as instruments. The actual relationship between his operation and mine has always been territorial, not cooperative. That holds. I don't need the operational details, she said. I need to know whether you're going to keep running the life you were running, in a way that turns our house into a staging ground for someone else's power play. No, he said. The Meridian Street operation restructures. I've been thinking about how for the last 4 hours in the car. There are parts of what I've built that can be made legitimate, the properties, the restaurant operations, the financial structures that aren't offshore and aren't dirty. Sandra has a colleague in commercial law who does restructuring work. It's a 2-year process, minimum. It's not a clean exit, but it's a direction. Elena was very still. You've been thinking about this since when, she said. Since I sat on the bedroom floor last night with your letter. He paused. Since I read what you wrote about what you wanted our daughter to know about love. At the word daughter, something crossed Elena's face unguarded. Brief, the expression of a woman who had been saying that word only to herself for weeks and was hearing it from him for the first time. Her hand moved on her stomach again. You're serious, she said. About the restructuring. About all of it. He looked at her. Elena. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands loose. I'm going to sit here and make you a list of promises. You know what I do with lists. I make them and I mean them, and then the operational pressure arrives, and I manage the pressure and the list moves to tomorrow. He held her eyes. What I can tell you is that yesterday morning I was a man who had lost his wife and didn't know it. Today I am a man who knows exactly what he lost and why and what it would cost to have a chance at undoing some of it. That's not the same as being fixed. That's not the same as being the husband you needed 7 months ago. But it's different from where I was, and I think you can see that. She looked at him for a long time. The baby moved. He could see it, the slight shift in Elena's posture, the reflexive catch of her breath, the way her hand pressed just slightly at the movement under it. Give me your hand, she said. He leaned forward and she took his hand and placed it on her stomach, and they sat like that in the inadequate lamplight of the front room of a stranger's house in Millfield, and he felt it, a small, decisive pressure against his palm, there and then not there, and then there again. He did not say anything. He did not have the right words for it, and he was done reaching for words that didn't fit. He just felt it and let it be what it was. Elena watched his face. She had been watching his face, for years had learned its landscape, its tells, the way it looked when he was present, and the way it looked when he was somewhere else in his head. She watched it now. What she saw was a man who was entirely in the room. She had forgotten that version of him existed. She did not take her hand away from on top of his. They sat. 3 days later, Adrian drove to Harwick and took his brother-in-law's truck, because Carmen had eventually decided she could tolerate his presence long enough to let him borrow a vehicle that wasn't associated with anything from his regular life, and he drove Elena to the city in it, not to the house on the hill, to an apartment that Sandra had identified through her commercial law colleague, a furnished place in a quiet district, 4th floor, with windows that looked out over a park and a second bedroom that was empty and waiting. The lease was in Elena's name. Adrian had contributed to the deposit and signed nothing. Elena walked through it while he stood in the entrance. She went through each room with the methodical thoroughness of an engineer assessing a structure, checking the windows, running the kitchen tap, opening the closet in the second bedroom, and standing in the doorway of it for a moment. She came back to the entrance. "It's good," she said. "Carmen helped pick it." "I know," she told me. Elena looked at him. "She also told me you were polite the entire time she was barely speaking to you. She was protecting you. It was appropriate." Elena looked at him for a moment. "She said the same thing about you." A pause. "She's not forgiving you yet." "She doesn't have to." He helped her with the bags, not all of them. She was particular about which boxes she wanted to unpack herself, and he respected it without asking why. He assembled a flat-pack bookshelf from the pile in the corner of the second bedroom because she'd pointed at it and said that one, and he had a drill, and it needed doing. It took 40 minutes, because the instructions were the particular kind of useless that flat-pack instructions always were, and he made 3 wrong turns in the assembly and had to redo them. And Elena sat in the doorway watching, and did not offer to help, but also did not leave. "Third step," she said, when he was wrestling with a cam lock that wouldn't seat. He looked at it. He'd skipped step 3. He disassembled the section and did it correctly. "Thank you," he said. "You always skip steps," she said. "I know. You think you can see where something is going. And the middle part feels like administration." He looked at the shelf and thought about the accuracy of that description, applied to roughly every significant thing he'd done in the past 7 years. "Yeah," he said. "The middle part is the actual thing," she said. "Steps are not administration." He drove the cam lock home. "I know," he said. "Vincent." Caruso was formally charged 11 days after walking into Agent Holt's office. The charges included evidence fabrication, conspiracy to commit fraud, and 2 counts related to the manufactured conflict used to keep Adrian occupied. His bar license was suspended pending the resolution of the criminal proceedings, which his own remaining counsel estimated would take between 18 months and 3 years. Danny Roth cooperated fully. His cooperation, combined with his documented coercion by Vincent and his lack of direct knowledge of the frame operation, resulted in a civil restitution arrangement rather than criminal charges. He was required to repay his portion of the Kessler Access compensation and was removed from any further role in Adrian's financial operations. His daughter finished her degree in the spring. Adrian did not withdraw the support because the daughter had done nothing, and punishing her for her father's fear would have been the kind of thing he was trying to stop being. Teo Rinaldi left the organization by mutual agreement and relocated out of state. Adrian made no move to prevent this, and made one call that ensured Teo arrived somewhere he could start over. He did not tell Marcus he'd made the call. Some things didn't need to be reported. Marcus Coletti was the hardest conversation. They had it 3 weeks after the Millfield house, at a bar neither of them had been to before, chosen deliberately for its anonymity. Marcus drank scotch, Adrian drank coffee. They sat in a booth in the back, and Marcus talked first. He said, "I should have brought you the account anomalies in week 1. Not week 6, week 1, yes. I convinced myself I was protecting you. That's what I said to myself. But the honest version is that I was afraid of being wrong about something I should have caught earlier. And I didn't want to bring you a half-cooked problem when I might have been the one who missed it going in." "I know. That's not protecting you. That's protecting my position." "I know that too." Marcus looked at his glass. "What I did with the 11 p.m. call to Vincent, I've run that back 100 times. Every version of it, I should have called you instead. I was recalibrating for myself, and I used Vincent as a sounding board, and I handed him the window that cost us the ledger. Yes. Is there a version of this where you trust me again?" Adrian looked at him. This was the question he'd been sitting with for 3 weeks. Not because the answer was unclear to him, he'd known his answer since the day after, in the cold light of what had and hadn't been salvageable, but because the answer required him to be honest about something he found uncomfortable. "Yes," he said, "but different. Not the same way." Marcus looked at him steadily. "I gave you too much authority without enough accountability," Adrian said. "Not because you aren't capable, but because I was running the operation the way I've always run it, on relationships and trust rather than structure. And Vincent used that. He used the fact that the whole thing ran on my personal authority and my personal trust, which meant whoever had my trust had no checks on what they did with it." He paused. "That changes. The restructuring is part of it. But the way the remaining operation runs also changes. Checks, separate oversight for financial decisions. Nothing moves on one person's authorization above a certain threshold." Marcus absorbed this. That includes me, he said. That includes you. Marcus nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that had weight in it. Okay, he said. I need to know you can work inside that. I can, he paused. Can I ask you something? Yes. Elena Adrian looked at him. Marcus stopped. Chose his words. Are you going to be able to fix it? I don't know, Adrian said. I know that she is living in a place she chose, and our daughter is due in 6 weeks, and I am present in a way I was not before. Whether that becomes something rebuilt or something finished, I don't know. He paused. I'm doing the steps in order. Marcus made a sound that might have been a short laugh if it had been a slightly different evening. Yeah, he said. Good, the baby came on a Tuesday. Elena called him at 3:40 in the morning, which was not the call he'd been expecting and was exactly the call he'd been waiting for. Her voice was controlled and specific in the way it got when she was managing something that required her full attention, and she did not have bandwidth for anything extra. Time, she said. I'm 20 minutes away, he said. Teen. He drove too fast and did not care, and found street parking 2 blocks from the hospital because he didn't have time to deal with the structure, and he ran the 2 blocks in a coat he'd grabbed on the way out without checking what it was. And he pushed through the hospital entrance and found the maternity floor and stood at the nurse's station, breathing harder than he'd intended, and gave Elena's name. Carmen was in the waiting area. She looked at him when he came through the door, and her expression said about 12 different things, the top layer of which was that she still hadn't forgiven him, and the layer underneath that was that this was not the moment. She's okay, Carmen said. It started about an hour ago. It's moving fast. I'll find the nurse. He sat down. He did not sit well. He sat the way people sit when sitting is the only option, and every instinct says something else. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at his hands and thought about Elena in a room behind a door he wasn't through yet. Carmen came back 8 minutes later. She said yes, Carmen said. Her voice was flat about it. The flatness was a gift. He understood it meant Carmen was choosing, deliberately, not to make this moment about her feelings toward him. Thank you, he said. She looked at him. Don't make me regret that I didn't fight her on it, she said. I won't, he went through. The labor lasted another 4 hours. He did not recount it to anyone afterward in detail. Because it belonged to Elena, it was her body. Her work, her particular ferocious endurance, and the details of it were not his to narrate. What he kept was the impression of it, the quality of her concentration, the way she moved through each wave of it with a kind of focused refusal that he recognized as deeply, essentially her. He held her hand when she wanted it, and moved back when she didn't, and said nothing when nothing was the right thing, and said her name once, near the end, in a way that wasn't encouragement or direction, just his voice reminding her he was there. She squeezed his hand once in response. That was enough. At 7:42 in the morning, their daughter arrived. The nurse placed her in Elena's arms first, which was correct, and Adrian stood at Elena's shoulder and looked at his daughter, really looked, with every piece of attention he had available, not peripheral, not categorized and filed and returned to later, but the full weight of it all at once. She was small and extremely opinionated about the adjustment from one world to this one, and not quiet about it, and her face had the compressed indignation of someone who had not yet decided whether any of this was acceptable, and she had dark hair still damp against her head, and she was the most specific and irreplaceable thing he'd ever seen in his life. Elena looked at her for a long time, without saying anything. Then she looked up at Adrian. He looked back. Hi, Elena said to the baby, in a voice she'd never used before, lower and softer, and with something in it that was entirely new. The baby turned her head fractionally toward the sound. Elena's eyes went wet. She did not wipe them. She just let them be there and kept looking at her daughter. Adrian reached out slowly, asking with the motion rather than the words, and Elena shifted the baby slightly toward him, without breaking the eye contact between herself and the infant, and he put his hands under his daughter for the first time, and held her, and she was impossibly warm, and impossibly solid and impossibly real. He had held the ultrasound photograph for weeks. This was different. This was the weight of it. He stood in the morning light of a hospital room, holding his daughter and understanding, in a way that bypassed language entirely, what had been at stake. Not the organization, not the money or the structure or the empire, or any of the 20 years of constructed power. What had been at stake was this specific warmth in his hands, this specific small indignant human, who was going to grow up knowing or not knowing her father, depending on the choices he made beginning right now. His daughter looked up at him, or looked in his direction. She couldn't see him yet, not really. Her eyes moving in the unfocused way of brand new things, but she turned toward his warmth, and he understood that as a form of recognition. He thought about the letter. I refuse to teach our child that the people who are supposed to love you most get to treat you like a footnote. He thought about the nursery-painted gray-green, while Elena stood on a step stool and waited. He thought about the missed appointment, the untouched dinner, the phone face. He thought about what it had taken to lose her enough that she'd packed a suitcase and walked out into the night with their daughter inside her, alone, with a manila envelope full of evidence as her only company. He looked at Elena. She was watching him hold the baby with an expression he couldn't fully read, layered old, something she'd been building toward, and something she'd just arrived at simultaneously. She needs a name, Elena said. You've been thinking about names. For months, she paused. I had a list, tell me. So she told him. 4 names, each one specific and considered, each one with a reason she explained briefly and without ornamentation. He listened to all 4 and thought about them and pointed at the second one. That one, he said. Elena looked at him. Why, she said. Because it sounds like her, he said. Already. Elena looked at their daughter in his hands. Yeah, she said quietly, it does. The weeks after were not a reconciliation in the clean sense. They were a process messy, incremental, with setbacks and silences, and conversations that stopped in the middle because neither of them had found the right end for them yet. Elena stayed in the apartment. Adrian was there more days than he wasn't, arriving in the mornings and leaving in the evenings, the rhythm of it building slowly into a shape that was neither the old marriage nor something finished. He learned the baby's patterns. He learned which cry was hunger, and which was position, and which was the specific protest she made at 3 a.m., when she decided the night had lasted long enough. Thank you. He learned without asking, by paying attention, by being the kind of present he had not been in the year leading up to the suitcase. Elena watched him learn. She did not make it easy. She was not a woman who softened the terms of something she'd earned the right to be rigorous about, and he did not ask her to. She called him on it when he defaulted to management mode twice explicitly, once with just a look that said exactly what the words would have. He received it, he adjusted. One evening in December, she called him after the baby was asleep and said, "The HVAC is making a noise." I can't figure out what kind. He was there in 25 minutes. He spent 40 minutes with his ear against different parts of the unit, and his phone, flashlight in the vents before he found the issue, and spent another 20, fixed with tools from the car and the building's minimal maintenance supplies. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching. When he was done, she handed him a cup of coffee. Not a gesture of forgiveness, just coffee while it was hot. He drank it, standing at the kitchen counter, and she sat at the kitchen table. And they were quiet together in the way they hadn't been quiet together in a long time, not the silence of 2 people in the same house who have stopped talking, but the silence of 2 people who don't need to fill every space with words. The baby made a sound from the other room. They both looked toward it. The sound resolved into silence. She was settling, not calling. They looked back. Elena looked at him across the kitchen. "Stay," she said. It was not a grand statement. It did not come with conditions attached or promises extracted. It was just the word, said at the kitchen table in December, with the specific weight of a woman who had thought about it very carefully and arrived somewhere she hadn't been certain she would arrive. He did not ask what it meant for tomorrow. He set down the coffee cup. "Okay," he said. He stayed. The suitcase was still in the closet of the apartment's second bedroom, tucked behind the flat-pack bookshelf. He'd assembled the one with the camlock he'd had to do twice. Elena had not unpacked it entirely. Some of its contents were still in there. A residue, the way you keep a thing not because you need it, but because putting it away entirely requires a certainty you're still working toward. Some mornings, he walked past the open door of that room and saw it there, and thought about the night he'd found it on the floor of their bedroom, and sat with his back against the footboard, holding her letter, and understood, too late, what he'd done. He thought not too late. Late, but not too late. The baby was asleep in the other room, making the small sounds of a person who had decided the world was acceptable enough to rest in, and the city outside did its ordinary city things, indifferent as always. And inside the apartment on the 4th floor, With the park windows, there were two people and a daughter, and a story that had not ended cleanly, because real things don't end cleanly. They end with someone staying. They end with the steps, done in order, the middle part not skipped. They end with a woman handing a man coffee while it's hot, and a man who finally understands that this ordinary, insufficient, irreplaceable moment is the thing he should have been protecting all along.